just going to open. And so let me just start that process now, and hopefully that other counselor appears. For the record, my name is Ricardo Arroyo, the Boston City Councilor for District 5. I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Public Health, and I'm joined by Michelle Wu, the Boston City Councilor at Large, and the chair of the Committee on Planning, Transportation, Development. And together we will be co-chairing today's joint hearing. I'm also joined by my colleagues, and let me just make sure I go through this list: Councilor Flynn, Councilor Flaherty, President Janey, Councilor Bach, Councilor Wu, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Asabi George. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at the boston.gov City Council TV. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Fios Channel 964. We will take public testimony. We're going to actually change it. It's generally at the end of this hearing, but I think for a hearing like this, it might be better to hear public testimony on the front end. And so after the councilors open, I am going to give the public a chance to testify. If you wish to testify, please email Shane Pack at boston.gov. Please state your name, your affiliation, and residence, and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes. And because we're going to do it at the front end of the hearing, I am going to be strict about that 2 minutes. You may also submit written testimony by emailing ccc.plandev@boston.gov. Today's hearing is on docket 1074, which is an order for a hearing to discuss speeding cars as a public health emergency and address infrastructure improvements. And docket number 1040, which is an order for a hearing to discuss pedestrian safety, traffic enforcement, and Vision Zero. We expect, and I believe are here actually, Chris Osgood, who's the Chief of Streets, Transportation, and Sanitation, Greg Rooney, who's the Commissioner for the Boston Transportation Department. Please correct me if I'm wrong on the way that I say your last name, Mary Bavenzi. Is that correct? Mary Bavenzi, yeah. MPH Director, Chronic Disease Prevention and Control Division at the Boston Public Health Commission, and Vineet Gupta, the Director of Policy and Planning at the Boston Transportation Department. I expect to have Brendan Kearney, the Deputy Director at Walk Boston, Christiana Lachuza, and that one, please correct me as well, Community Engagement Manager at Livable Streets Alliance, and Becca Wolfson, the Executive Director at the Boston Cyclist Union. And so with that, I'm going to turn to Councilor Wu, who is a co-chair because we are two different committees hearing both of these very related, similarly related hearing orders together. And so with that, I'm going to turn it to Councilor Wu, and then Councilor Wu, if you can turn it to the lead sponsors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. I know we're all quite zoomed out, but somehow my laptop has decided that it is fully done with Zoom. So I don't know, my camera's not working and it presents this weird icon with the slash through the camera. So I'm very grateful to Councilor Arroyo for taking the lead on directing the traffic here, if you will, because I'm also having these technical difficulties. Just thank you so much to Councilor Flynn and to all the sponsors, all my colleagues here. Obviously, these issues are ones that the council has been championing and working on for a very long time in partnership with folks represented on this call, and they continue to be sources of anxiety and fear in a lot of cases, and potential opportunity during this pandemic. So I know we'll see a lot of Chief Osgood this week as well, and we have other conversations later in this week. So thank you so much to all my colleagues here for taking on this very important topic and making sure we're still making progress during these difficult times. Thank you. Oh, and I'll turn it over. I think that's my cue to turn over to Councilor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Wu and Councilor Arroyo for chairing this joint hearing today on traffic safety in discussing speeding cars as a public health emergency. I also want to thank Councilor Janey, Council President Janey, Councilor Bach, Councilor Baker for being the co-sponsors to these hearing orders as well. To the panelists for being here, including Chief Osgood, Commissioner Rooney. I have called for hearings every year. I have been on the council on pedestrian safety and Vision Zero, including advocating for 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in our neighborhoods, because I believe it is one of the most critical issues we face in Boston. Unfortunately, we have witnessed a spike in serious and fatal crashes recently in South Boston and elsewhere in our city. It's critical that we continue to have this conversation about pedestrian safety and traffic calming infrastructure needed to make our streets safer for all. There were several car crashes in recent weeks, including 2 pedestrians who were fatally struck by vehicles in South Boston, one in Andrews Square and one in First Street. Another pedestrian was struck by a pickup truck at the entrance of the public garden when the truck crashed into a stone pillar. And just one last week, there were 4 separate incidents where cars crashed into buildings or light poles in South Boston. I will go over the intersections, but also this weekend in my neighborhood, actually on my street, two doors down from me on Gold Street, a car crashed into a house 2 doors down from me. Based on our council hearing, safety walks with advocates, and discussions with neighbors and civic groups, I recently recommended an updated 12-point safety plan for my previous proposal to the city to help address some of the issues we're witnessing, from speeding cars, cut-through traffic, ride shares like Uber and Lyft. I firmly believe that we need to continue our focus on infrastructure improvements to our built environment to force cars to slow down, a slower speed limit in our residential neighborhoods, and consistent enforcement from Boston police on speeding cars. I think it's unconscionable for cars to be speeding through our neighborhoods. There's no reason for a car to be going 25 miles anywhere in the city of Boston. It's too fast. It is also my position that now is the time to call for speeding cars in unsafe roads what they actually are. It's a public health emergency. Advocates and public health agencies have long viewed road safety as a public health issue, as do I, as car crashes are one of the leading causes of death and injuries in the nation. In fact, the World Health Organization highlighted road safety as a public health issue. New York State Department identifies motor vehicle traffic as a major public health concern as well. So I hope that this conversation today will lead us on a path where we can continue to make progress. But this is a subject we all know well. It's a subject that's not going away. We have to stay vigilant on all of these issues and provide the safest streets and sidewalks possible, especially for our seniors, persons with disability. We see a lot of young families taking their children and grandchildren to school all the time. So let's continue to work together to make pedestrian safety improvements throughout every neighborhood of the city of Boston. Thank you to my colleagues and thank you to the city officials and panelists for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And I just want to note that Councilor Campbell has joined us. I'm going to go to President Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Just quickly, I know this is going to be a hearing that attracts a lot of attention and possibly a lot of testimony, so I'll be very brief. I want to thank certainly my partners on this, Councilor Flynn and Councilor Bach, and certainly I would give a shout out to the other makers on the other docket as well, and a huge shout out to the advocates in this space. So want to thank the Cyclists Union, want to thank Livable Streets, Walk Boston, ACE, for all of their work on the front line. Certainly those who are joining us today on the panel, including from the mayor's office. I see Chief Osgood and his folks. So thank you for all of the work. Quick story, last week, tragically, a friend and colleague was struck and killed. She was riding a bike. This is a long time, many of you may know her, a longtime educator in Boston Public Schools, someone who I was able to work closely with, particularly in my time at MAC. And it just, I think, underscores the importance of us dealing with this issue and making sure that our streets are safe. My district, lots of folks depend on public transit, and we know all the challenges with public transit. And we know that through what we can control through our streets, that we can make sure that public transit works better. And we just have to make sure that our streets are safe, particularly for children and seniors, as Councilor Flynn has already put out there. And so I'm hoping that we don't have to see more deaths in our streets, and that we are putting in safeguards throughout our city and building a better city that really truly is for all of us and not just for big oversized vehicles. So I'm hopeful that we will take this as a call to action. And I know that my colleagues on this call already get it, but we've got to step up our efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to everyone on this call.
Thank you, President Draney. Councillor Bach. Councillor Bach. Okay, might be a connection issue. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the makers of both these hearing orders. Road safety and pedestrian safety and speed management are all critically important. I attended a Ghost Bike rededication on Com Ave on Saturday, where in memory of a young man who was struck by a articulated truck 8 years ago, before the protected bicycle lanes were installed in the first and second phase along Com Ave. That infrastructure is saving lives every day. And I think this is a really important opportunity to look at what we're doing well, and then also making a commitment to continuing to build safe bicycle infrastructure across the city. The other issue out in Alston-Brighton, we have recently had a mobility study. And the thing about a mobility study is they do speed testing along some of our residential roads. And there's a few places where people from out of our district cutting through to take a shortcut to work. We're doing 35 to 40 miles an hour on a one-way residential street through our neighborhood. It was just a matter of time before some dreadful tragedy happened. So I really welcome this conversation this afternoon, and thank you all, and thank you to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, thank the co-chairs for co-hosting, and also the lead sponsor for his work in the space, as well as his partnership with the co-sponsors and other colleagues. This is an enormously important issue, and I'm speaking from a citywide perspective. Second to housing issues and public safety, pedestrian safety, and traffic enforcement and infrastructure improvements are among the top things that I know I do, and I'm assuming we all get calls from and emails year round, not just in light of a tragic or fatal accident. So thanks to the partners and the advocates that are on this call as well. Our community members know the dangerous roads and intersections in their neighborhoods. They call and email about them all the time. So I'm hoping we can learn more about the mechanics of how intersections and roadways are prioritized for improvements as part of this hearing, but also want to use this opportunity to renew my call that the Boston Police Department establish a bona fide traffic division in each police district, and that have it staffed on every shift. The problem we have is that cars are traveling too fast. It's like the wild, wild west out there. Too many accidents, too many injuries. Obviously, we're seeing our insurance rates spike because of the accidents that happen in our city streets and or on the expressways that cut through our city. But more importantly, there's no enforcement happening at a grand scale, and that's what we need. You could lower the speed limit to 5 miles an hour, but if you're not going to enforce it, no one's going to pay attention to it. So again, it's not sexy stuff. It's not getting a gun off the street. It's not thwarting a robbery or getting a drug dealer off the streets, but it's necessary because of the situation we find ourselves in. It's a serious public safety and public health issue. And so if we don't have our police partnering with us, and if we don't have our police officers out there enforcing, pulling vehicles over and or stopping cars for speeding and or blocking the box and or blocking a handicap ramp, etc. The list is endless, but we need to obviously make that part of our community policing efforts because we hear it across the city. So hopefully, and I wish that our police partners were on this at this hearing as well, because we need them to step up their game. We need them to enforce the traffic laws in and around all of our neighborhoods. That would go a long way in making our streets safer. So we can only beat up the transportation department so much with respect to sort of roadways and intersections, et cetera. But if we're not enforcing the laws, and BTD doesn't get to enforce the laws, our meter maids don't get to enforce the laws. They can ticket you for a meter violation or a crosswalk or handicap ramp or hydrant. But more importantly, the real enforcement is going to be our police department, and we need them at the table here. We need them to partner with us, and we need them to make this a priority as part of community policing throughout all of our neighborhoods in every police district. Thank you to the chairs and to the sponsor. Look forward to this hearing.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Bach, it looks like you've reconnected as a co-sponsor. I want to make sure you get to go, followed by Councilor Sabi George, followed by Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. Sorry, Councilor Arroyo, my internet connection fell, as you saw. I want to thank everybody here today, all my co-sponsors and the MBTD for being with us. I think of mine as the most pedestrian district, and perhaps those are fighting words, but I think it's objectively true. It's how people get around the city, and it shouldn't be something that they're doing in fear of their life. And to me, Boston is a city that should be designed first of all for walking. And I just think it's so important to keep the Vision Zero commitment of remembering that the top of that pyramid of vulnerability really is the pedestrian. We've seen a lot of really unsafe, scary driving behavior lately. Councilor Flynn has detailed some. Obviously, we had a car take out a section of fence in the public garden just this weekend after the incident that hit a pedestrian a few weeks back. So I think, we're obviously in a moment of particularly dangerous speeding, but I'll just say that the things that I'm most interested in addressing today are what are the systems fixes where we can go beyond, intersection by intersection, diagnosing a problem after there's a tragic accident, and how do we kind of make a city that's safer overall for pedestrians. And I think many folks here know I'm particularly interested in how we could shift our signals policy citywide in a way that makes us design intersections very much with that pedestrian in mind at the top of the pyramid in every instance. But I know my connection's unstable, so I'll finish it there and just thank again my co-sponsors in the department for joining us, and Councilors Arroyo and Wu for chairing today.
Thank you so much, Councilor Bach. Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the lead sponsors for today. And certainly a conversation needs to be had and continues to need to be had around pedestrian safety, but thinking about our roadways, our infrastructure around our roadways as with a multimodal perspective for sure. When we think about all of the traffic, both pedestrian, vehicle, bicycle, public transportation, all of that needs to be, we have to think about the complexity of that system and how do we make sure that it continues to work and works better for our residents across the city and for those coming and going in our city. Also want to make sure that we're thinking about the impact of different apps, whether it's the use of the roadways now, thinking about Uber, thinking about Waze, thinking about those transportation methods, thinking about how we can encourage or disincentivize blocking the box. How do we make sure that intersections aren't blocked, because it does create safer passage for pedestrians and bicyclists, but also it creates more better flow of traffic, vehicular traffic. And then always, I will always talk about raised crosswalks, making sure that we have more of those, especially where our most vulnerable travel and cross, thinking about playgrounds, elementary schools, senior centers, and also the impacts that has on slowing traffic, which is something that we're looking to do today. So looking forward to today's hearing and testimony from the public as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you to all the sponsors for these hearing orders, which of course continue the conversation we've been having on the council for far too long about these crashes and folks who continue to die as a result of them. Just recently, the teacher, or I should say former principal of Young Achievers, Jenny, lived in my district. She was amazing. We all loved her. Think about it, right? She was retired and celebrating her life and just going for a bike ride and is struck down and killed. And so it's really tragic that people continue to die. I think we all know that we have to increase the pace in which we're doing things. I want to thank the Slow Streets team, the folks at Vision Zero who are in my district every single day, implementing the plans for structural changes to our streets and doing it in partnership with the residents and the advocates. Really important work. But our timeline is, we just have to speed it up. I mean, right now my street is being repaved and I'm out there looking at them wondering, you know, why don't we have speed humps? Because we know this is a dangerous street. And so enforcement is critically important to this conversation. We've done some creative work with BPD, including a traffic analyst, and prioritizing enforcement, and have made some headways there. There's still some work to do, clearly lowering the speed limits, but structural changes is critically important, and we have to move this along quicker. I can't keep stressing that enough. Other things I think are really important is looking at other departments playing a role too. I get a lot of calls from my constituents about Boston Public Schools and getting them to promote other modes of transportation, other alternatives, educating children about alternative modes of transportation, and leading by example. And so I think BPS and other departments should also be a part of these conversations. And lastly, I'll just add that, you know, the advocates, the residents, everyone has mobilized in tremendous ways. We know what we have to do. We have examples and models. It's just a matter of doing it and setting aside the resources and human capital to get it done. So I'm going to keep pushing that. Thank you again to everyone from the administration for being here. Thank you to the advocates. Thank you to my residents as well, who continue to be advocates on the ground. And thank you to the sponsors. Thank you, Councilor Royal.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Mejia.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. Thank you to the sponsors for hosting this public hearing order. I agree. I think I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and more importantly is the what we do with what we know. When we talk about travel, on how to travel across our city, we need to prioritize safety. We've heard too many stories of people who have been injured or worse because our streets haven't designed to put people first. I hope to get some answers on how we could do better and look forward to the actions that will come from this hearing. I also want to just uplift that when we think about transit safety, you know, I think there is one thing is being able to cross the street safely and making sure that we have all the right parameters in place. But then I also think that we don't talk about the intersection of violence. And I know that you're probably wondering why I'm asking you all to think about violence, but if people don't feel safe walking in our streets, it doesn't matter how well we can design them. So I think that it's important for us to really think about the intersection of this conversation as it relates to what a lot of communities are dealing with right now in these streets. So I just want to offer that as something for us to consider as we continue to talk about how we design streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I do want to note before we proceed that the Boston Police Department was not invited to speak as a panelist, so it's not a matter of them choosing not to be here. They were not on the list of panelists suggested by the sponsors. And so I do want to make sure that that's clear. Very briefly, before we head into the panels, I do want to give the community a chance to speak. Normally we wait all the way until the end, but I do believe this is an appropriate time to have them speak. I'm going to be incredibly stringent on the 2 minutes. So when you hear my voice, consider that you got 10 seconds, wrap up whatever that sentence is, because I don't really want to mute you or boot you, but I will so that we can continue with our hearing. So I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes to go, and I'm going to go in order of this list. So Ford Cavallari, I'm going to allow you to talk. You're first, if you can unmute. Ford.
I'm unmuting.
There you are.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I appreciate the fact that the council is taking up this very important issue. Safety on the streets can't be understated. We need more of it. My main point in speaking to you is to plead that the city be consistent in having every effort support street safety. One of the things that my organization, the Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations, or ADCO, the 9 largest neighborhood associations in the downtown area, one of the things we have been very concerned about is the increase in proliferation of distractions that are making drivers drive a lot worse. Obviously, we all know cell phones, and there's been some legislation to affect that. But electronic billboards are a very, very dangerous distraction that is actually increasing in the city of Boston. Over the last couple of years, the Streets Department has installed 38 Dassault animated electronic display panels on Stewart Street and on Washington Street, and it's like driving down an arcade, and there are many images, a lot of distractions. In addition, there are large electronic format billboards on things like the W, where it's really hard to pick out crossing pedestrians. And very importantly, there are 2 huge building side electronic billboards being proposed in December, one in front of the ZBA in Chinatown, at Stewart at Harrison, and another one on Causeway Street. If we put these things in, we might as well increase the speed limit to 60, because we are inviting distraction and we're inviting pedestrian mishap. We should really be concerned about electronic billboards, and I ask the council to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sticking to time. Adam, you're next. I don't want to butcher your last name, and so if you could just say your last name for the council.
Sure. My name is Adam Pieniazek. I'm a resident of Dorchester, specifically the St. Mark's area on Edwin Street. I have a few points. One, I think it's very critical that all of our elected officials walk, bike, and take the T to work. They don't need to do it every day, but they need to do it some of the time. That includes every elected city councilor and especially our mayor. There's just no matter what we tell you, there's no replacement for firsthand experience walking, biking, and taking the T in our city. And that's how a lot of Bostonians live every day. And I really would like to see every elected official do the same so they can experience how we live every day. Another note, the state really must overhaul the process of driver's licenses. It's frankly absolutely ridiculous how easy it is to get a driver's license and to maintain it. It's no effort. We need a real driving test that actually tests people's ability to drive safely. And I would really like to see the city push the state to do that, because our current driver's license test is frankly a joke. And I think most people could pass it heavily intoxicated, to be honest. Additionally, redesigning every street in Boston to be safe is the ideal, but it's not feasible. I know the street I live on, Edwin Street, it's a tiny residential street between Florida Street and Dorchester Ave, and we have cars speeding down the road all the time. And I think that's every street in Boston. You could probably ask anyone and they'll say the same thing about their street. And we can't redesign every street. So we just need to get unsafe drivers off the road before they ever get on the road. Finally, I really want to call out that people in Dorchester have no safe way to bike into the city. It just does not exist. So if we're going to prioritize safety, we really need to look at the biggest neighborhood in Boston, and that's Dorchester. Over 100,000 people live in Dorchester, and we simply don't have a safe way to bike into the city, let alone walk. The city knows that Dorchester Avenue is a high crash street. The mayor lives right off of Dorchester Avenue, does not bike to work, should bike to work, is the chief of the climate mayor. So really, we need him to lead by example and to experience how dangerous Dorchester Avenue is, not just for cyclists, but also pedestrians. A few months ago, someone was killed right at Ashmont Station, and nothing's been done to make that area safer. And really, the last point I want to make is, why is the Dot Greenway taking so long if we're prioritizing walking and biking safety? That's taken over a decade to get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew Lawlor.
Hi. Oh man, that picture's got to go. Sorry.
Floor's yours. Don't worry about the photo.
All right. So just a couple of comments, both on my own behalf as a resident of Rosendale and also for Walk Up Rosendale, a community group in the neighborhood dedicated to making Rosendale the most walkable neighborhood in Boston, Councilor Bach. I would support what Councilor Mejia noted, that the context for any kind of street change is really important. And so we can do all kinds of things to make our streets safer from speeding drivers, but if we don't make them safer in other ways, as she indicated, I think we'll be failing everyone. So something to always bear in mind. I would also like to note, and I appreciate everyone so far referring to crashes, not accidents, but I think it's important in our language talking about these issues to always emphasize that we're talking about drivers and not vehicles. So vehicles don't jump curbs, they don't crash into buildings, they don't kill people. People behind the wheels of those vehicles kill people. So we should always refer to drivers, not vehicles, not cars, not trucks. Two quick points. I think first I would say it's obvious now that the Neighborhood Slow Streets program needs to be scrapped, and we need to turn it into an immediate citywide program in every neighborhood for every street. Every part of the city, every resident knows how dangerous our streets are from speeding traffic and drivers. And we need to do a lot better. We need to do a lot better, a lot faster. And making neighborhoods compete against each other for limited resources for street safety is a crazy idea. It's been crazy since the beginning and needs to end. So I would urge that we stop rationing safety on our streets and that we do slow streets everywhere as fast as possible. And I just want to note a little bit coming back to the comment before, I don't think anybody who's in an advocacy position in our city at this point is advocating for widespread police enforcement of traffic. I think what we want to have is police focusing on the most dangerous drivers in a data-driven way. I don't want to see a lot more police flooding our streets trying to pull people over for speeding infractions and other sort of routine things. I think we need to do that through much better street design and safety improvements for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is that kind of enforcement ultimately always ends up pulling over the people that are perceived to be problematic, Black, brown, people who are on our streets trying to do the best they can. And so I don't think that that's a route that any advocate wants to see happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawlor. Lisa Beatman.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Can you hear me?
Yes, floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Beatman. I'm testifying as an Eastern Rosendale resident and as a co-leader of the Mount Hope Canterbury Neighborhood Association and American Legion Corridor Coalition. We have a lot of experience with living along one of the most dangerous corridors in the city, with the highest, among the highest crash rates. We also have the wonderful experience of very, very recent traffic calming infrastructure that is starting to be installed along American Legion. And so we really note the difference. I want to say a few things that are maybe a little bit different perspective than some of the more obvious points. It's very noticeable to talk about fatalities and injuries, and they're awful. They're absolutely awful. But there's other very, very widespread damage that goes on when people who live in a community don't even take the risk. So they don't. So many people who live in all the pocket neighborhoods and go to school and go to the parks on along American Legion, gave up on walking, gave up on biking. Parents have testified that they won't let their kids walk 2 blocks to their friend's house, no matter how old they are. I think many of us, when we were growing up, what are our childhood memories, right? Going to visit friends that are in walking distance, getting on our bikes and being told, well, just come back, by dark. we have been isolated. Many people in Boston have been isolated from their neighbors because it's just not safe or pleasant to cross intersections, to cross to parks, to safely get to public transportation stops. So I heartily plead that the city put traffic calming citywide as among the top 5 priorities for the 2000 FY22 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Martyn. Martyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. I'd like to speak in support of what Ford Cavallari was saying about the potentially very dangerous role that electronic billboards may play. And this is something which can be stopped before it gets going, and it lies within the power of the city to stop it. We've noticed, for example, that the BPDA has filed a zoning amendment, which has so far been deferred, but would at some point come before the zoning commission that will make it easier, facilitate people's ability to make applications for installing or converting existing billboards into digital billboards. I'm particularly concerned about the impact of all this upon the neighborhood where I live, which is Back Bay. I mean, is the idea to turn Copley Square into Times Square? I've noticed that these applications basically are being filed by a few well-known companies which can make a lot of money off them, and they claim that they offer community benefits. Well, on that basis, you can try to get any kind of undesirable activity installed in a neighborhood, claiming that it will give you community benefits. But there's a lot of evidence from many places around the world which indicate that the operation of these electronic billboards not only cause light pollution and are regarded as very unpleasant by residents, they interfere, they disrupt the aesthetics of special neighborhoods, but they also very critically distract drivers. And the last thing we want is drivers on urban streets with all kinds of different modes of transportation underway being distracted. As I said, this is up to the city. The city can stop this, can preempt it before it gets going. And I really hope that they will, both by getting the BPDA to change its decision. And the BPA, ironically, a few years ago, particularly referred to the dangers and unpleasantness of electronic billboards. They're only permitted for now in a few very small districts within the city, and the great majority of locations within the city, they are forbidden use, and they should remain forbidden. So I hope that the city councillors and others will do their best to make sure that this phenomenon does not grow and exacerbate an already dangerous situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sarah Freeman.
Hi, everyone. I'm from Jamaica Plain, Arborway Coalition. We've been trying for decades to get some traffic calming. It's a DCR road, but it's in the city of Boston, and DCR is actually working on it currently. What makes cities comfortable and pleasant to be in is not the ability to drive from point A to point B as fast as possible, in my opinion. But over the years, it seems like that's been the driving principle, pun intended, that there's almost a fear of upsetting the motorists. So when there's a street being redesigned, it's like you have to account for the motorists first. You have to account for parking. And then pedestrians and bicyclists seem to, and trees and anything else has to compete for leftover space. And we get into a psychology that if someone even hesitates for a moment, they get honked at. The aggression is just really not conducive to people being out there. I applaud anyone before me who talked about self-enforcing. You can we have 25-mile-per-hour speed limits. That doesn't make anyone drive 25 miles per hour. The physical changes are what will make it happen that people drive the speed that you want them to drive. Streets can accommodate motorists. I'm not anti-car. I own a car, I like my car, but I'm anti-speeding and anti-aggressive driving. The traffic needs to be controlled. And motorists should not be upset if they have to slow down a few seconds or stop for
10 seconds.
a pedestrian. I'll leave you with just trying to understand what are the impediments to getting this done more broadly. Is it money? Is it consensus, or whatever it is? I'm glad to hear everyone talking the talk. Now let's walk the walk. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles.
Hello, my name is Charles Neckyfarow. I'm Chair of the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay. The Neighborhood Association, NAB, is an organization that represents the residents of the Back Bay, has long considered traffic and pedestrian safety issues as important aspects of life in our neighborhood, as it is in most neighborhoods across the city. We were active participants in the process that made changes to traffic patterns on Beacon Street to reduce speeding there. We appreciate the opportunity that the council has offered to address these issues across the neighborhood. We make the following group of suggestions that we believe can help to reduce the safety issues that are in the subject of this hearing. One, we would like to improve enforcement regarding the prevalence of loud and speeding packs of motorcycles, motorbikes, and cars that often circulate throughout the Back Bay and downtown areas at night, especially on Commonwealth Ave, Boylston Street, Beacon Street, and cross streets in the neighborhood. This will enhance pedestrian safety and reduce noise pollution. Two, the Boston Police Department has said that they will not chase speeding vehicles because of safety concerns. The police should be required to present an alternate plan to curb the speeding before the perceived lack of enforcement leads to a traffic free-for-all. Three, enforce bicycle safety laws, including those that prohibit bicycle cycling on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall and the public garden, where bike riders can cause safety hazards for pedestrians, including young children and the elderly. Bicyclists should be strongly encouraged, if not required, to use the bicycle lanes that have been installed throughout the neighborhood. Four, consider reducing the speed limit on Comm Ave to 20 miles per hour. Consider features to slow down traffic. And finally, petition the Commonwealth to allow traffic cameras with enforcement in the downtown regions at intersections along major roadways to aid police in achieving traffic enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Rick Yoder.
Okay, thank you. But I live along in Eastern Rosedale along American Legion Highway, and I'm the other co-chair of the Mount Hope Canterbury Neighborhood Association. Listen, I did not compare speeches, so now I'm going to have to kind of edit as I on the run. A couple other facts about our American Legion Highway is that, for instance, in the last summer, over a 30-day period, there were 29 car crashes recorded, many with injuries. It's that level of danger we've been facing. But as Lisa said, we are getting the street calming methods that we need that built traffic calming. And I want to say to people out there, I wonder how to get these things to happen in your neighborhood. It's very hard work. Lisa this has been her main project for 6 years. Hundreds of emails, dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings with counselors, with city officials, elected, unelected, appointed, making alliances with other neighborhood groups, working with wonderful groups like Livable Streets, some individuals from Walk Up Boston, Walk Up Rosendale, working with our neighbors, getting a tremendous amount of work. Unfortunately, at this point, that is what this is going to take. And I want to give thanks to the mayor. The former mayor would not even talk about speed humps. They just would not even talk about them. And here we're having them installed and other ways of controlling traffic. And then Chief Osgood, who has appointed some wonderful people in the Active Transportation Division. I want to
It looks like you muted yourself there, Rick. If you can get 20 seconds.
All right, can you hear me? I think I went away.
Yes, you're here. Another 20 seconds.
Okay. The point I want to make is there is money. At the same time, we've noticed the Northern Avenue Bridge is slated to rebuilt with $85 million of city money. I understand the importance of the Seaport District to the health of Boston's financial health. But I would suggest that until all the highly unsafe roadways, particularly that Boston's historically underserved areas, until they're made safe, that this bridge replacement be put on hold. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Bookston.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yours.
Very good. My name is John Bookston. I'm a board member at the Fenway Civic Association and a representative to the Alliance for Downtown Civic Organizations. I have 2 points to make. One, the Fenway Civic Association has requested traffic calming, particularly on Hemingway Street, a notorious speeders place, from the traffic calming grants, but never gets one because we don't have schools or libraries in our district. And it's just as important for us as it is for another district, but we don't get the points. Second, the Zoning Board of Appeals is beginning to grant exemptions and allowances for electronic billboards in prohibited areas. And that is very worrisome. There are 3 allowed areas, one of which is a district by Fenway Park in the Fenway. And the rest of the city is supposedly prohibited. Please take a close look at the dangers, and there's gobs of information on the internet about it, about driving safely when you are distracted by electronic billboards. I thank you for taking up the traffic safety and pedestrian safety issues, and that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bookston. And if anybody else would like to give comment, we'll do it after the first panel. So at this point, I'm going to shift to the administration's panel. If you haven't spoken yet and you'd like to speak after the administration speaks, raise your blue hand. You'll go after the counselors. And just to reintroduce our administration so that they can then go into their presentation, we're joined here by Chief Chris Osgood, who's the Chief of Streets, Transportation, and Sanitation, Commissioner Greg Rooney, who's the Commissioner at the Boston Transportation Department, Mary Bavenzi, who's the Director of Chronic Disease Prevention and Control Division at the Boston Public Health Commission, and Vineet Gupta, the Director of Policy and Planning at the Boston Transportation Department. And with that, the floor is yours. I believe we can start with Chief Osgood.
Councillor, thank you so much. Thank you to all the councillors for convening this and for your leadership on this. I really appreciate all of your efforts and really appreciate the panelists that spoke before, as well as knowing the panelists that are going to come after, the wise words and good thoughts that are coming from them. As Councillor Arroyo said, I'm Chris Osgood. I have the honor of serving as Mayor Walsh's Chief of Streets. The other folks from the administration who are on this panel include our BTD Commissioner, Greg Rooney, Vineet Gupta, our Director of Transportation Planning and Policy, and Mary Bavenzi, who is the BPHC's Director of Chronic Disease Prevention and Control. In a moment, I'm going to just run through some quick slides. So if I can be able to share some slides, that would be great. Before I do, and just thinking of the comments that I think were raised by both the Council President and Councillor Campbell, obviously, there are, as well as Councillor Braden, there's a number of reasons why that are fresh in memory of why it is so important that we dedicate ourselves to this cause. It was 2 weekends ago. That was World Day of Remembrance. That is a worldwide, a global moment for all of us to remember those who lost their lives or had serious injuries on our streets. As Councillor Braden reflected, it was last weekend that we rededicated a ghost bike on Commonwealth Avenue at St. Paul's in memory of Chris Weigel. This work is incredibly important, and I know that it's important to all of us and that we're all focused on doing it together. Mayor Walsh has a commitment of being a Vision Zero city, a city that eliminates all roadway fatalities and serious injuries from our streets. I'm going to quickly walk through kind of the 4 major strategies that we use in pursuing this critical goal for all of us. One is focused on our main roads, really those places that are high crash corridors across the city of Boston. Second is building out our strategic bike network. Third is talking about our work in sort of clusters of neighborhood streets called the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. And the fourth is a set of work that's about really the targeted interventions, in some ways related to John's last comment about streets that may not be part of the Neighborhood Slow Streets program, but we know that we need to be doing work on. So just to quickly walk through that work. This here on the left, as is familiar to many of you, is what we call the high crash network in the city of Boston. We have mapped all of the serious crashes and fatalities on Boston streets. What you see on the map on the left are those corridors and streets of our city, roughly 60 miles in total, where that have the highest number of crashes, or experience the highest number of crashes on them. We have been reorienting our entire capital budget essentially to go after the redesign and reconstruction of these streets. What you see on the right is some of the work which we've already done. As the 2 representatives from NAB spoke to, we've obviously done work already on Beacon Street in the Back Bay, done some other work, including, as Councillor Sabi-George referenced, building in raised crosswalks along Center Street between Jackson Square and Hyde Square. There's a set of projects which I'll talk a little bit more in depth to, but one that Lisa sort of referenced for the redesign of American Legion Highway, which we were able to do over the last couple of months. And in the budget which the mayor's put forth, and that you have been able to advance, as a whole series of projects that we are looking forward to design and implement and work with the community on, including the one that Councilor Wu referenced earlier, Melnia Cass Boulevard, which is on this network as well. Just to dive in quickly on 3 of the projects which have moved forward over the course of this year. One is Columbus Ave, essentially from the Eggleston Square Library at the southern end all the way up to Jackson Square at the northern end. This is being redesigned with really a couple of priorities in mind. One is, as folks may know, building a center running bus lane, which will be the first center running bus lane in the Northeast. But this is also a corridor which has had a number of serious crashes over the last several years, 25 alone in 2019. So as part of this project that is under construction right now, there's a number of treatments which are really designed to improving pedestrian safety in this corridor, and will complement some other work focused within Eggleston Square, the square itself, to redesign that section. In addition to the work on Columbus Ave, the American Legion Highway work and the Cummins Highway work are really critically important. American Legion Highway, and Lisa and Rick have been really incredible advocates and champions, as have many of the other folks on this, as part of this hearing, on the redesign of American Legion Highway. Livable Streets, as you can see in sort of that middle section of this slide, did a survey on American Legion Highway, and the top concern was speeding and drag racing. And you see sort of that stat below about the amount of speeding that has been documented between Morton Street and Walk So essentially from Cummins Highway in the south to roughly Franklin Park, or sort of the middle of Franklin Park at the north, we've done a series of redesigns over the course of this past year, and last couple of months really, essentially taking a 4-lane road in many stretches down to 2. And we've done that as a way of being able to calm speeds and improve the crossings in this corridor. And we know that that sort of intervention will work, in part because we've seen that in a bunch of other places, including Cummins Highway, which you see on the right side of the screen. Cummins Highway has been a long-term project of the city of Boston. It's part of our capital project, has actually been the complete reconstruction of this corridor from just west of Mattapan Square up to sort of approaching American Legion Highway. One of the key concerns of residents along this corridor has been speeding. And one of the things which we have done as a result of that is piloted over the course of this year, the intervention of going from, in most stretches, a 4-lane road down to a 2-lane road. We have documented sort of the change in speed you see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, where we had over 1/3 of drivers documented in 2018 traveling above 35 miles per hour. After this intervention, after reducing the number of travel lanes on major stretches of Cummins Highway, a significant reduction in the instance of speeding in this corridor. This sort of approach has actually been used in a bunch of places, not just to sort of calm speeds and improve pedestrian safety, but also to build out our strategic bike network. As folks know, and is incredibly visible as part of our Connect Downtown effort, we have made a number of changes in the sort of area from Boston City Hall down to the Boston Common and over to the Public Garden as really a hub in our overall bike network. And before talking about sort of the bike network piece, a lot of this is really also about calming speeds and improving pedestrian safety. So we have reduced the number of the crossings and the travel lanes on Tremont Street and on the roads around the Public Garden, as well as on other sections of the network, such as State Street, adjacent to Boston City Hall and Court Street. All of this is done with that same sort of idea of how do we calm speeds, reduce crashes, and consequently save lives on our streets. The focus of this project is also in part, obviously, about building out that hub of our overall bike network. This is forms a connection for downtown residents and residents from across the region to be able to access jobs, hospitals, and open space, and connect to things like our Connect Historic Boston bike network, the Esplanade, and eventually the Southwest Corridor. As part of our work on American Legion Highway and Cummins Highway, we have also been able to obviously add protected bike infrastructure, which is really allowing sort of better connections, in this case, combined between Mattapan Square and American Legion Highway and through American Legion Highway all the way up to Franklin Park to the Southwest Corridor and beyond. In total, these 3 projects are adding about 6.5 new miles of protected bike lanes to our network. We had 8 miles of protected bike lanes coming into this year, so this has added another 6.5 miles on top of that, and really with credit to residents, advocates, and the active transportation team in being able to build out this work over the course of this year. In addition to the strategic bike network and the work on our major corridors is also the work around our neighborhood slow street program. This is a program which is really targeted towards clusters of neighborhoods or clusters of residential blocks that have a couple of key attributes, really thinking about how we prioritize where we want to be investing, first in traffic calming on residential streets. These are sets of blocks in our city that have high numbers of seniors, high number of youth, high numbers of persons with disabilities, are also places that have a high number of crashes both within the area and on the surrounding streets, as well as a high number of sort of community destinations, things like parks and schools, community centers, et cetera. These are the 15, or as there 16 that are listed. I'll get into that in a moment. These are the sort of 15 places that we are investing in first, and really to Matt Lawlor's point, thinking that this is not at all the end, but simply the start. How we're thinking about first prioritizing these sorts of redesigns of what is well over 40 miles of neighborhood streets, and implementing things like speed humps, redesigning them for 20 miles per hour, thinking about sort of new approaches to making sure that these streets are really wonderful, wonderful streets to be able to live on. There's a 16th in here as well, which is really a collaboration between the Boston Public Health Commission, the Boston Public Schools, and the Boston Transportation Department, and that's the area that is focused on Walnut Ave and Humboldt Ave, and is a been able to move forward through a $980,000 Safe Routes to School grant, essentially being treated similarly as the rest of the Neighborhood Slow Streets program in terms of the interventions and treatments that we're pursuing. The fourth thing I just want to touch on is really a set of targeted interventions, knowing that there are lots of people, as was mentioned by John, the Fenway Civic Association. There are lots of places in our city that are not major corridors, that may not be on the strategic bike network, and that are not currently part of the neighborhood slow street area, but that are in need of safety interventions. And here has been a place where the mayor and the council together have supported additional funding for the Boston Transportation Department and others to be able to expand our toolkit and be able to accelerate our work in this area. So a couple of years ago, we started adding radar speed feedback signs to our streets. We now have over 100 that have been deployed, and we just put out a purchase for another 40 radar speed feedback signs. We are looking at sort of the faster implementation of things like speed humps on our streets, as well as new and improved or changes in the way in which key intersections and crossings work. As you see sort of in the middle of this panel, and as I think Councilor Bach referenced in her opening comments, a focus of ours also over the course of this year, and in particular over the course of this winter, is really taking a look at our signalized intersections and retiming those signalized intersections with making sure that we are optimizing for safety, in particular safety for our most vulnerable road users. And then we are constantly trying out some new interventions on our streets. On the right-hand side, you see what is the latest deployment that we are trying, which is a set of essentially tactical rumble strips that have been put out by the Boston Transportation Department on Conway Street in Rosendale, with the idea that seeing if this is a positive thing to be able to add to our toolkit of things like flex post, radar speed feedback signs, speed humps, et cetera, all to be able to calm speeds and reduce crashes on our streets. This work overall, obviously, is not just about one program. It is a whole set of things together. It's also not just about one department or cabinet or even sort of the mayor and the city council, but really about sort of the collective effort. And so we know that the urgency, and we share the urgency of eliminating crashes and fatalities on our roads. We look forward to working together, as we have already, with advocates and with the council and with our sister agencies. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mary Bovenzi, who will talk a little bit about the Boston Public Health Commission's great work on this, and then look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, Chairman Arroyo, Chairwoman Wu, and members of the council. My name is Mary Bovenzi, and I'm the Director of Chronic Disease Prevention and Control Division at the Boston Public Health Commission. Can everybody hear me okay? Good? Awesome. So I want to thank you for bringing us together to talk about the issues of speeding and pedestrian safety from a public health perspective. As the health department for the city of Boston, we are focused on protecting those who are the most vulnerable, including exposed road users, such as pedestrians and cyclists. From the perspective of chronic disease prevention, we want to encourage people to be more active, to bike and walk instead of drive, for better health. At the same time, from an injury prevention standpoint, we need to provide conditions that make such physical activity safe and accessible for everyone. Chronic diseases, including diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension, continue to be major health challenges here in Boston, even as the pandemic continues. 8% of Boston adult residents report having diabetes, while 25% of Boston adult residents reported having hypertension in 2017. To prevent chronic disease, people need opportunities to live a healthy lifestyle, which include, among other things, participating in adequate physical activity. Unfortunately, our modern environment is not often supportive of healthy habits and encourages sedentary behavior, as we all sit here all day on Zoom calls. A healthier environment can support an individual's choice to walk or bike instead of drive. So changing the environment to promote healthier behaviors and protect vulnerable road users requires strategic vision and planning. We are proud of the work that we have accomplished together working with residents, organizations, and other city departments, including our colleagues at BTD and DPW. This work includes neighborhood slow streets, which Chief Osgood just talked about. And the neighborhood slow streets incorporates public health into its work by taking an active living by design approach. And this is an evidence-based framework to create safer environments for human-centered movement. In partnership with BPS, we lead the Boston Safe Routes to School program, which works across city departments to promote and encourage safe and active transportation to school. The program continues our focus on vulnerable road users by teaching school-aged children pedestrian safety, engaging with school communities, and making road safety infrastructure improvements. And the Boston Public Health Commission and Boston EMS also participate in the city's Vision Zero initiative. Vision Zero's goal is to bring the number of traffic deaths and serious injuries to zero by 2030. We know that speed limit reductions, infrastructure improvements, education, and proper traffic enforcement will lead to many saved lives. These life-saving measures will not only reduce the severity of crashes, but also have the potential to lower the actual number of crashes. We cannot understate the importance of data in approaching this public health challenge. In Boston, we are fortunate to have Boston EMS responding to motor vehicle crashes when there are reported injuries. Because of this, Boston EMS is able to provide accurate data around the time and location of bike and pedestrian crashes. Our data-driven collaboration with BTD and other city partners has been effective in reducing incidents. In closing, we'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today and for taking a public health approach to pedestrian safety, and we look forward to hearing from others. Thank you. And I'm not sure who I'm passing it to.
I think Mary, back to the chair for questions. Okay. Unless Commissioner Rooney or Vinny, there's anything you'd like to add.
I see a head nod from Vinny. Commissioner Rooney, if there's anything you'd like to add, please feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to go directly into questions from the council. I see you unmuted, Commissioner Rooney. I'm not sure if you wanted to just take questions or if you wanted to make a statement.
Just happy to join the chief and others on thanking the council for this opportunity to speak today. I think the previous speakers have covered a lot of ground, so happy to just go right into the questions at this time.
Thank you so much. One point before I head into the council, there's a attendee whose name is not listed as their name for speaking. If you do not have your actual name as your Zoom name, then I won't actually be able to give you public comment time. So please change that. And with that, I'm going to go to the co-sponsors first. And so that would be Councilor Flynn, followed by President Janey, followed by Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you to the panelists for your testimony. I highlighted in my opening statement and in my hearing order that pedestrian safety and this discussion should be a public health issue, should be a public health emergency. If it was declared a public health emergency, what assistance would Public Health Department and BTD and the police, would it offer them any other alternatives that we can't do right now?
I'll let Mary perhaps best talk about the specific authorities that a public health declaration could provide. But I will say, with great credit to the council and the mayor, there was a huge number of resources which we are now equipped with, which we've never had before. So Councilor Flynn and it was your leadership and obviously collaboration and Councilor Baker and the entire city council to help us lower the speed limit as a default, the 25 miles per hour. And you've been able to increase significantly the city's investment in safety by supporting the mayor's request for doing things like adjusting our parking fines so that we could allocate more funding both on the capital and operating side and be able to increase the amount of staff who are focused on planning, engineering, and design work and construction work on our streets. So there's been a huge amount of work we've already been able to do because of the authorities that the mayor and the council have already provided to us.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Mary. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to jump in. So the conditions for kind of a public health emergency are legal, really, and it's set in state law and is typically rooted in infectious disease or disaster relief. So just for context, the only public health emergency that BPHC has ever declared is the current COVID-19 pandemic emergency. So beyond that, I can't really speak to like the legality of it, but I can say, kind of to echo what Chris was saying, this has been a public health priority for years for BPHC, and we'll continue to look at this through a public health and a health equity lens, importantly. And we're not at zero. There's obviously work to be done, and we look forward to continuing to partner with the council and the city agencies on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I know this is an issue we've talked about before, Chief. Concurrent traffic signals where cars and pedestrians have the right of way both at the same time. I know, again, we've talked about this many times. It's a big concern of mine. It's a big concern for my constituents in the Fort Point, in the South Boston waterfront area. I just think we're asking for, well, let me stop there. I think if a car and a pedestrian both have the right of way at the same time going in the same direction, I think it's a real public health emergency. I think it's a public safety issue. What's the latest on this issue, Chief?
Councilor, thank you for your the question and for your consistent advocacy around pedestrian safety. This is obviously an issue that you have raised, and it is in part one of the reasons why we've engaged a design consultant who is working with us, looking at a number of our intersections. Again, in particular, looking at some of the high crash intersections or intersections that are part of the high crash network. Those include a set of intersections on Mass Ave as well as Andrew Square. And we are going through the process of looking at those intersections, and from that, figuring out are there more systematic changes that we need to be making with our overall sort of network of traffic signals, how we prioritize their retiming and when we retime them, the sorts of retiming patterns that we put into place. That work's happening over the course of this winter. Happy to keep you updated as that work goes forward.
Thank you, Chief. I have specific questions on specific areas in my district, including South End, South Boston, Chinatown, Back Bay, this Bay Village, but I'm not going to ask the specific ones about different intersections. I just want to give an opportunity for my colleagues to continue the Q&As, but the specific questions I do have, I'll ask offline, Chief.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. President Janey.
Thank you so much. And many thanks again to Chief Osgood, Commissioner Rooney, the entire team here, and certainly my colleagues for keeping this a huge priority for the council. I know it's a priority for the city as well. I'm curious, my good friend and colleague, Councilor Flynn, has been advocating for quite some time around speed limits in our city. And I know that citywide it's 25. I think Councilor Bach and I are the two councilors with the distinction of not owning cars and doing a lot of our travel on foot and on the T. When I am in a car, I've noticed, and just this weekend I was driving a car and I noticed I was on, I don't know if it was Mass Ave or Albany Street, but I found myself going about, and I'm going to admit it, I went over the speed limit. I was going about 30, 32, and then I checked myself to say, oh my goodness, let me slow down. But my point here is that 30 felt okay on that big corridor, and 25 often feels much too fast on smaller residential streets like my street. So my street is a cut through street, and it's good to see that my neighborhood is now in the slow streets, and I have some other questions for that. So I wonder, where are we in our city in terms of trying to slow down? Like, I really think on my street, I try to drive around 15 because it's so narrow. It's a one-way street. Yeah. I've got cars on both sides and I've got a playground. So I never want somebody coming in and out of those cars. So in my mind, my street should be slower, but perhaps a major corridor like Albany Street or American Legion or one of these others might be slightly faster, because I agree. I think we're all going way too fast in our city. But I wonder if there are distinctions that your team is thinking about, or are we just going to be 25 all across the city unless otherwise posted?
Great question. So really, when we're redesigning all of the neighborhood slow streets, so in your district, Highland Park, the Humboldt Ave, Warren Ave area, Mount Pleasant, Moreland Street, et cetera. All of those are being redesigned for 20 miles per hour, and Greg, if I'm wrong, will be posted at 20 miles per hour. In addition to that, obviously things like school zones, et cetera, are posted and signed at 20 miles per hour. We are also, to your question, and in many ways to a point that was raised also by Councilor Breeden, which is beyond the neighborhood slow streets area, we are looking to see how do we on residential streets really take us from 25 to 20. This has been something which the mayor has been talking about, and we want to figure out the right way of accelerating that work, and to the extent possible, doing it in collaboration with physical design changes or changes to the physical nature of the street to be able to provide that cue to drivers as well.
And on the slow streets point, and I've been a big fan, but I think the frustration that I have is the frustration that residents have. It's how do you get into the queue? Is it still the squeaky wheel? What criteria? They're finding out about it after the fact. Too few resources are going into it, so too few neighborhoods can really take advantage of it. I'd like to see us get beyond an application process where we're putting all the onus on our residents. I love that residents are engaged in helping us solve these, problems, but I want us to be much more proactive around slowing down or finding these areas. For example, the Complete Streets project in Nubian Square over by the library. I just mentioned I was driving a car the other day. When I get up to the Boys and Girls Club, I'm forced to slow down. And so it's working. Whatever you're doing over there is causing cars to slow down as they should right there at that Boys and Girls Club. And then it opens up a little more widely. I want us to get beyond, though, this application process, and that we're just planning a better way. As we're talking about planning and pedestrian safety, I didn't hear it in the presentation, but I am much more interested in how we get, so in Nubian Square, for example, cars are always going through those yellow lights, which makes it hard for pedestrians to cross. If the lights are not in sync, it's hard. There are very few, is it the flashing beacon? What's the that I love, the flashing beacon lights?
Protect the rapid flash beacon.
I want to see more of those. We have talked about doing those X's in the intersections. What are those called? Chief Osgood?
Right, but don't block the box intersections.
Exactly. I'd love to see more of those with the lights in sync that really give pedestrians a chance to get across some of our major intersections. I'm thinking obviously Nubian Square, where we're doing that work, so it should be, and I'm sure you've already got that built in to the design, but other big intersections where Flynn, Baker, and my districts meet, like at Washington and Columbus, and there are huge intersections, Mass Ave in Huntington, where it's difficult for pedestrians to get across the street, and shouldn't we be blocking those with the X's so that cars are not getting into them and really letting the pedestrians get across? So that's one question. Where are we with that? And then I have a lot of district specific questions, which I'm happy to wait for a second round. But I am very interested, and let me get this last question on the floor. In that map that you showed with all the crashes, it's hard for me to see it on my Zoom screen. If you wouldn't mind kind of talking through what types of crashes, it looked like they were obviously in the much more dense areas where Meade, Flynn, and Bach, our districts are, where you looked at the southern part of the city. And I don't know, is that because of how our streets are designed? Is that because there are just more people and more cars? Why are the crashes concentrated in certain sections? And then what types of crashes? Because I really couldn't see that. So I'm interested in that. I'll save my district questions for the second round. Thank you.
So neighborhood slow streets, block the box. I'm sort of shorthanding it, and the Vision Zero high crash network. We need to take those in that order.
And the flashing beacon, I want some more of those.
Yeah. And Commissioner Mary, feel free to jump in as well. So on neighborhood slow streets, I think there's sort of two things I want to sort of in some ways split. One is how we prioritize where we should be doing our work, and the second is sort of the selection process, so to speak. I do think that we are, we've certainly heard the feedback, and we are thinking about what how we would identify the next places to move. We've heard that feedback. Obviously, Matt Lawlor referenced that as well in his opening comments. Heard that feedback from the council. It's certainly something which we want to think through as we think about how this program expands and how we accelerate its implementation. In some ways, similar to Councilor Campbell's point about the resurfacing of our street right now. I do think that the prioritization sort of schema, the rubric that we use for neighborhood slow streets, of prioritizing those places where we have the most number of vulnerable road users, the most number of crashes, is an important piece for us to focus on. There may be ways in which we can sort of present that more broadly, either to the council or beyond, but I think that approach is one which is making sure that we're investing in those places that have had the longest history of crashes and fatalities on the streets, and also, again, the most number of youth, the most number of seniors, the most number of persons with disabilities. On block the box and rectangular rapid flash beacons, I will get back to you. I'll confirm whether or not we are hatching out those intersections, including the Nubian Square intersections, with sort of the don't block the box X's. As part of the mayor's legislative agenda over this course of this last 2 years, we've been pushing for the ability to have photo enforcement for don't block the box, which would be one more way that we could prevent that sort of work from that sort of behavior, and make sure that intersections are safer for pedestrians to cross, as well as to make sure that our intersections are working optimally for buses, for cars, etc. Rectangular rapid flash beacons are a major part of our toolkit. They're used both in the sort of neighborhood slow streets program, but also in our targeted interventions. I can see, unless Commissioner Rooney or me or Mary, you guys know off the top of your heads, we can get back to you about how many we have deployed. But that is something which we are looking to expand. And then I will put into, we can email to the council. And I'm not sure if there's a chat option on this particular Zoom platform, but if folks have an interest in diving into the Vision Zero maps, you can go to boston.gov/transportation/vision-0, scroll down to the Vision Zero maps. You can see a set of maps under the label of Boston High Crash Network. And there are 4 maps in there. One that has the 3% of streets that have the most number of crashes that have involved pedestrians, the 3% of streets that have had the most number of crashes that involve cyclists, the 3% of streets that have involved the most number of crashes that have involved just vehicles, and then the map that I showed. And it, I believe, is, I think, 2015 to 2017 crash data from EMS that has been analyzed to build out those maps. In addition, on that page, and happy to share these resources afterwards, you can link to a dashboard that shows the crash statistics in the city of Boston since 2015, and then as a bar graph, as well as a map showing crashes that have involved pedestrian, cyclists, or somebody, or just drivers, both injury crashes as well as fatal crashes on our streets. All that can be found on our website, and happy to throw that in the chat if it's possible. Otherwise, happy to share that back with the council afterwards.
Thank you, Chief Osgood. And there'll be a second round for folks who do need that. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you again, Chief Osgood, and to your whole team for being here. I'll also throw a few questions together, and then maybe you can take them in a set. So one is just that, there's been a lot of issues that have come up to me around different parts of my district around right on reds lately. And I wonder if we've thought about having a default, like shifting our policy so that we have a default for no right on red. Doesn't mean there aren't situations where we might decide that it makes sense, but I just know we're seeing a lot of situations where there are car pedestrian conflicts because of that. And particularly a few places in my district where the cars involved are sort of swinging from they're swinging in motion from a busier street onto a less busy one. And so it's causing an issue. And I just, again, from a systems perspective, wonder if we could think about shifting what the default is there. And in general, would just love to hear from you a bit about the signals policy and how you guys might be taking a look at it. I just think that, I think that many of us district councilors, we draw your attention to intersection after intersection, but the more that we could shift our signalization policies in general, I think in favor of, giving pedestrians a head start at crosswalks, right? And increasing the generosity of the time. And just, there's a lot of things that we can do in addition to sort of creating the four-way crossings that Councillor Flynn alluded to, that I think would help across the board. And would love to hear what you're thinking on that front. Certainly, I think that changing the half block crossings around the public garden to half cycles is great, just for the number of pedestrians who use those. And obviously, the tripling of the crosswalk between the common and the public garden, although unfortunately some state work is keeping us from using it in its full glory so far, but appreciate that. And just do appreciate the way in which the bike lane project has that benefit for pedestrians of narrowing those, what I think of as kind of speedways around our signature parks. I wondered if you could, I think, so one question is the signalization and the no right on red default. A second question is, I'm sure this is true for every counselor. I mean, we just have enormous issues with ways right now, right? And the fact that the secret cut-throughs that only your locals knew are now available to everybody with an app. And I mean, there's a kind of, to some extent, it's hard because there's no way we can make that information secretive again. So then it becomes, how do we actually change the streets themselves to discourage that? And I know in a few places we're literally thinking about that, right? Like changing the direction of a street or doing something else drastic to cut down. And so one question I have is how we can be more systematic about that, about thinking about places that just don't work anymore because the cut through traffic has become dangerous, and whether there's a more systematic way to look at those. I also wonder if it means that we should be looking more seriously at something kind of more radical, super block approach in some of our neighborhoods, like the kind of, for folks who don't know, because sometimes super blocks are used to describe big places with no pedestrian cut throughs, but there's a different way of using them that's about kind of trying to drive all but local car traffic to the edges around a neighborhood and then have just local traffic. And I know we've talked about congestion charging, and it's never something that we've seemed to have the sort of power to get through at a state level. And it's obviously a longer conversation at the city level, but I just wonder if we should be thinking radically about kind of like local traffic only zones in some of our neighborhoods because of the way that Waze has just changed the landscape. So that's my sort of provocative question on that. And the third one would just be if you could speak to us on when it comes to, I mean, you heard loud and clear, Fenway's not the only neighborhood I have that has been unable to acquire slow streets designation, in part because of the lack of schools, which I think it's very hard for people to hear that public infrastructure that they wish they had in their neighborhood is the reason why they can't have other public infrastructure improvements. I see you guys sort of talking about deploying these speed bumps, raised crosswalks, rumble strips, narrowing, right? Like bump outs, all these sort of this set of tools more tactically and more widely across the city. And I wonder how you're thinking about and how we in the council should think about what your sort of, what your kind of system for fielding those requests and running through them is. Because it seems like right now we've got a 3-on-1 system for fielding, this is broken, fix it requests. And we've got this slow streets like, hey, could we get some people really thinking about how to transform a whole thing? I think there are a number of places where people have a good intuition, like, hey, this would be a great place for a raised crosswalk, or this would be a great place for a speed bump. And it feels right now like that kind of falls between the silos. And I would love to know from a process perspective, how you guys are thinking about shifting that. So those are my 3 questions. Process shift for tactical slow streeting, and then signals policy, including no right on red as a default, and whether we should go the super block route.
Those are three great questions. Commissioner Beatman, feel free to jump in as well. On the signalization side, so we have roughly 850 in our city, and what are in a collaboration between the BTD planning team and the BTD engineering team. This person has been leading Vision Zero on Benit's team, and a signal engineer within BTD. They've been looking at essentially the subset of intersections that have had the most crashes. And Benit, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's most crashes, not the most pedestrian, most crashes. And then a subset of that where there have been a higher number of pedestrian crashes. That is sort of the Mass Ave a set of them on Mass Ave, and using that as a way of thinking about what other changes should there be to our policy in general that we should be making standard. That's on top of some of the work which you referenced sort of already, adding in leading pedestrian intervals when we do have concurrent signals, shortening cycle length as you referenced, as ways of just being able to process people more safely through an intersection. That work is ongoing. Happy to sort of, whether it's the council broadly, Councilor Flynn and Councilor Bach, happy to sort of brief you guys as that work continues. On the ways question, I think I wrote down your 3 the wrong way. Oh, never mind. Got it. Right. All right. So on your ways question, I think that it is a very important, really correctly provocative question. I think we do want to think about how we work with navigation apps in a different way. We realize the pressure that it is putting as they are trying to optimize sort of a transportation network, and that's consequently sending more cars down neighborhood streets than have been there before. I do think that right now we are doing this a little bit more on the sort of recognizing the problem and responding to it than thinking about how we can respond to it more systematically. And so I appreciate your question. Some of those interventions, as Councilor Braden is familiar with, and as you referenced, is thinking about sort of the directionality of streets as a way of getting at this. Some of it is also thinking about sort of the street that's right outside of City Hall, is about sort of the physical redesign of those streets, tabling them, making them much more sort of oriented to pedestrians, with sort of your point in mind, sort of really encouraging people to use other roads besides those roads as ways of as getting to their destination if they're driving a car. Your third question is basically we're taking all the 3-on-1 requests we've received from the council and thinking about with funding which was allocated in this FY21 budget, going through and with more of that targeted work, essentially going more rapidly through the sort of intervention that we were doing at Isabella and Arlington and other intersections throughout the city of Boston. How do we identify more of those and over the course of the year be able to make physical changes in those locations? Right now, over the course of this winter, and Commissioner Bean, correct if I'm wrong, we're looking at sort of around 10 to 20 that we would be able to redesign that are spread throughout the city and are at places where there have been, again, sort of historically more crashes than in other intersections, really, and where we've received, but sort of really thinking about reducing crashes going forward. That's work which, again, we are actively doing right now and will be literally hitting the streets, we hope, at sort of April 15th, which is the start of our official 2021 construction season. Commissioner Benit, Mary, anything that I'm missing to add?
No, I thought that was a good summary. I think on that last piece that we are staffing up and funding up on kind of doing those tactical interventions that are in addition to the slow streets program and then the systematic kind of planning and design around the corridors that have had the most injuries in the past. So that's something that our planning and engineering team is really focused on, and we're hoping to ramp up with the additional funding that's been provided through the chief and the mayor.
Great. Thank you. I imagine that's my time.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some issues already covered. In terms of neighborhood slow streets, I've raised the issue before. Vinette is familiar with the issues over on Washington Street between Com Ave and Brookline. That's a corridor that's been zoned for senior housing and people with disabilities, and yet the road in front of their buildings is like a racetrack. So we have documented cases of people swinging right on Egmont Street, just there at Covenant House. and knocking pedestrians off, knocking over pedestrians, knocking people out of wheelchairs, and tossing bicyclists in the air. So, you know, that area is really crying out for some serious intervention in regard to slow streets, and even more so because it is an area where we have a high number of residents who are elderly and folks with disabilities. So we did do a walk out there with the Walk Boston group, when we took speed readings and everything, and it was really shocking to me. There was a police detail right there, but some drivers were managing to get up to 40 miles an hour within you know, seconds of passing a police detail. It was really shocking. The other question I have is with regard to Waze. You know, when you're on your telephone and you go to try and make a phone call when you're in your car, it tells you you're driving. So I wonder if Waze is so clever at finding fast routes through neighborhoods. Is it clever enough to be able to tell people that the speed limit is 20 miles an hour and not to drive so fast? Like, it should be, it's a wonderful tool for people who commute and to cut through neighborhoods, but it's causing havoc in our neighborhood, especially because we have so many folks cutting through. And is there any way that the city can interact with Waze, like the developers of them? Because we hear bizarre cases of one-way streets that people just keep going up into these dead-end one-way streets, and then they're not able to get out very easily and causing havoc. So there's definitely, is there ways that we can tell them to correct the problem? Just in terms of the slow streets, we have Brook Street and Parson Street are very, very fast, again with cut through traffic. I know that the mobility study has drawn up a large number of recommendations that will be addressed over a period of time, obviously, because it can't all be done at once, and some of them will be related to the I-90 project, which is about 15 years out ahead of us. So it just, in terms of, I realize that every district is in the same position. We're all asking for changes, and a lot of this is aspirational. We want these changes to make our roads safer. But I also have a question for you guys. You know, this seems to be, we need to maybe put more money in the budget to help address these things. And I know you folks are probably going to be coming to ask, but, you know, in terms of balance, in terms of really making some of these things happen, we might actually need to put our money where our mouth is and start to put some more money into the situation so that we really can make our streets safer. That might be a question for Madam Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, but yeah, those are really my comments and questions. You know, Ways is really causing havoc out here, to the point that some residents are taking the law into their own hands and creating little roadblocks and doing mischief to try and stop it. But oh yes, the other thing you mentioned was the EMS has a record if they attend to an accident, that there's data on that. Is there any way that we as councillors can get access to that data and just have an idea of what sort of, how many crashes or incidents that an EMS ambulance has had to attend in our districts, just to get some idea of the location and the incidents, the frequency of these accidents? That's all for me now. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor, I'll respond if I miss things, just remind me. Mary, Commissioner Vinnie, feel free to add in. First, on the data side, the data is all at boston.gov/transportation vision-0, and I'm fairly certain the raw data might be on our data portal. If it's not, I imagine that we can actually get that if you're addressing that piece. But it is mapped and it is charted on the city's website. Again, happy to share that link afterwards. And that is data that is pulled from EMS. On Waze, we do have a partnership with them. They actually, there's a sort of a consortium of cities that they work with. There are, if I am not mistaken, some visual cues in the app about the speed limit. But I think that your point is well heard and well taken, that maybe we can push ways to make that more of a visible part of their app if it is not already. And then similarly to think about how do we, to your point and to Councilor Bach's point, and frankly, many of you have raised, are there ways that we can encourage the Waze developer team to optimize, not necessarily around the shortest trip by time, but the optimal trip for a city and its constituents. On Alston, Brighton, and some of the specific projects that you mentioned, I think that I'm very glad you raised that, because it is sort of a whole, to Councilor Bach's point, sort of another way in which we are identifying these spot interventions. And as you mentioned in the AB mobility study, we have documented a whole set of those, and we'll be working on those over the course of the next year. It's those studies coming out of the BPDA, which has also driven things like the changes that are coming to Eggleston Square, the community process that's happening there, to some degree the work that's happening in Mattapan Square, the work that's happening right now in Nubian Square that the council president referenced, and other sort of neighborhood interventions that are a little bit different than some of the programs which I outlined. Mary, Commissioner Benit, what did I miss?
Just wanted to add on that last piece that, for example, Councilor Braden, we met with the BPDA team. That's, in fact, we were involved from the very beginning with the Austin Brighton Mobility Plan. But more recently, now that we've collectively finalized the recommendations, we sat down as a team, our engineering, our planning folks, people at Public Works with the BPDA planners, and we've prioritized all those recommendations. So for example, you mentioned the Washington Street project between Com Ave and Brookline. That's in the first list of priorities for the neighborhood, for example. So there's a lot of collaboration, but as Chief Osgood mentioned, that's another kind of arena, all the plans that are being done by the BPDA in collaboration with the Transportation Department, that's another area through which we are identifying priorities. The data, if you just Google Vision Zero Boston, Counselor, that website should pop up and you'll be able to go to the exact EMS data that you're looking for on the website. It's pretty up to date.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. And then Councillor Mejia, then I'll ask my questions and then we'll do a second round if necessary.
Yes, thank you. So I do have a few questions. Just curious, how do constituents currently report problem area intersections and crossings? What does the city how does the city work with constituents to design streets that are safer for pedestrians? Like, I'd love to know what your engagement process looks like. And if a pedestrian is injured or killed as a result of poor designing on behalf of the city, how do we reconcile that, if at all? And I'm curious to know what neighborhoods receive the most complaints / attention when it comes to pedestrian safety issues. And how are we using the problem of designing more pedestrian-friendly streets to activate community partnerships and to employ minority business owners for the purpose of constructing safer streets? Do you want me to call you out, or who's going to answer those questions?
I can start up, and then Councilor, appreciate those questions. Again, if I miss some of them, please feel free to let me know. So the principal way that we hear from constituents about requests to make interventions on the street is through 311, whether that is through the website, by people calling the 24-hour hotline, or through the mobile app and letting us know that way. To your point, though, that is one of many channels. The council itself is another way in which we obviously receive a number of those requests. And then also through sort of various community processes like the Alston Brighton Mobility Study that Councilor Braden just referenced, and other sort of community planning efforts. All of those things sort of help inform or are all channels for us to be able to hear from constituents. That data is really important to us. That information is really important to us. as is sort of the data around where crashes are happening in the city, and both those things inform our work. On the engagement process, I would say over the course of this year, and with great credit to Commissioner Rooney and to Vineet Gupta, to their team, and actually a number of the transportation advocate partners that we have, we've been sort of broadening the way in which we do engagement in our city. Some of it is about physical changes on our streets and making them in a pilot fashion. So I think of Cummins Highway. So Cummins Highway, the stretch that has been in the capital budget as part of the overall redesign and reconstruction of Cummins Highway. There had been a public conversation about what would happen if that goes from 4 lanes to 2. A traditional path could have just always been something which was sort of managed through slideshow and through public conversation. But over the course of this year, we physically tried it out first with water-filled Jersey barriers, and now with paint and flex posts, and that is giving us a chance to be able to pilot something physically on the street, and then get feedback from residents as part of that process, which will inform the actual then reconstruction of Cummins Highway, and allow residents and road users along that boulevard to give us even more feedback. In addition to kind of those physical changes on the street that we've been trying out, again, with a lot of credit to a lot of different folks, has been sort of greater efforts in all of our outreach to make sure that we are running community meetings in multiple languages, that we are doing flyers in multiple languages, that we are presenting physical changes on our streets in ways that are simply more accessible. So if you check out, for example, the Connect Downtown work, the pedestrian and bike infrastructure and road safety work, which was done around City Hall, the Public Garden, and the Boston Common, that is in many ways designed best to be viewed on a phone, and it is available in 3 different languages, with again with credit to Vineet's team there. So we are very much thinking about kind of how do we actually broaden the way. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Councilor.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to let you flow, but I'm also trying to interrupt your flow because you're going a mile a minute here, and so I'm just trying to catch up with you. I know I have time constraints, and I know I have other questions, but I want to go back really quick to the Cummins Highway situation, because I've been hearing from a lot of folks who had no idea that this was happening, and then all of a sudden it all popped up, and maybe they didn't go to the meetings or they didn't hear about it or whatever it is, but I know that a lot of people who are upset about that whole situation right now. And it's interesting to hear that you guys are testing things out, but in a lot of people's minds, this is what it's going to look like when it's all said and done. And so I just think that in terms from a communication standpoint, it would be really helpful for a lot of folks to understand the processes, because there are a lot of folks who have felt like they have not really been thoroughly engaged in that particular situation. And so it's good to know that you guys are testing things out, so that when they call to complain, I'm like, oh, they're testing things out to see how y'all are going to react. So if you don't, you see, call and participate in the process. But it doesn't seem like it's a done deal. For a lot of people, it seems like it was. So can I get some clarity around that? Is this like a pilot project, or are you guys testing things out, or what's the communication that I can share back from folks who are upset about this Cummins Highway situation?
Yep. So I appreciate sort of the sort of course correction on that. In many ways, there was a lot of outreach, but we've also, Councilor, similar to you, heard a lot of feedback from residents, both in support and with concerns about what is out there right now. This is the design that is being tested. We had sort of identified as our preferred design for that corridor. It is not the final construction though. And so that is part of a public process, which is in front of us over the course of 2021. So there's actually more time for people to give us feedback on this. We've done a number of sort of in-community sessions, obviously Zoom sessions, flyering, mailing to residents up and down the corridor. And we have every interest in being able to figure out how to refine those practices to be able to address exactly what you raised, which people feeling like they were unaware of what was coming. And we want to make sure that that is not what people feel. They're sort of well aware of the process going forward.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of it in terms of community engagement that would be helpful too is that there's enough ample notice when there's going to be disruption on a particular street, because what we're hearing is that things are just popping up and then all of a sudden you have to find another detour to get somewhere because they're redesigning an entire speed hump. No one even knew about it. So if there's ways for us to be able to communicate to people multiple times, because, you know, not everyone's going to check their emails. Not everyone is going to be on social media. Not everyone opens up I mean, you're going to have to try multiple ways of touching communities, because one way or another, that information will hit them. So even if it's putting a PSA out, you know, I just think that the more people can engage, the better. But I want to make sure that the little bit of time that I have left, that we can answer the question in regards to minority businesses and the role that they play in engaging them in the design process, the implementation and all that, please.
Great. Appreciate the question there too. So there's sort of two different elements there. One is with the mayor's equitable procurement practices, which the executive order which he has put forward, which is specifically around sort of how we contract in the city for whether it's designers or construction companies, engagement specialists, et cetera. That is sort of a part of the way in which the Transportation Department, Public Works Department, and every city agency now works. I do think there's also opportunities to think about specific engagement for stakeholders along corridors. So to the extent that there are businesses or business groups that you want us to make sure that we are connected with, by all means, let me know. I'm very happy to make sure that we're making those connections.
Just to add to that, we are in the way that we redesign our streets, we are proactively reaching out to groups using multiple languages that we feel have traditionally not been included in the past. And so whether it's going to Latinx communities in East Boston, or whether it's trying to get to every business that's on Blue Hill Avenue, we're really doing a huge effort on the ground to engage local communities. We've also started to identify youth groups to work with them. You know, Marapan Fitness, I can't remember the full name of the group, is one example in Marapan Square. So there's a sea change in how we've done outreach to design our streets.
Because I always feel like the same usual suspects are the ones that get invited and show up, and always are the ones, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, or whatever it is that they say.
Yeah.
That's why I really like Council President Janey's question about how these decisions get made, and it's always usually the ones that are the loudest.
Yeah.
So I think that really extending beyond the usual suspects to include them in the process is really important. And the last thing that I will offer is that in terms of your outreach is really thinking about non-traditional folks, right? So not everything has to just be around livable streets. If you're looking at, you know, housing advocates, they're the ones who are also trying to figure out from a planning design space, even people who are working in the public health space. I think that your partners, I think you have an opportunity to build alliances with other folks who are doing work that are deeply connected to what you're trying to do and engage them. Because I think what happens is that most communities, you know, everybody's fighting around violence prevention, or they're fighting for housing justice or education, but we rarely create opportunities for us to have one conversation to see how all of these things are interconnected, right? So if kids who are afraid to walk to school or are afraid to ride the bus because of violence, you can link up with folks who are doing violence prevention work and help them understand how safe, livable streets impacts them too. And that's the question that's what I opened up with earlier, is really thinking outside the box and how do we open up that tent so that you all are not doing these conversations in silos.
Appreciate that, Councilor. Thank you.
That's all for now.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. So I'm going to just leap into my questions here, Chief, and I appreciate everybody for their patience. So I'm going to ask two questions. I could get into a whole bunch of specific things in my neighborhoods, and I still might. We'll see how this goes. But specifically, I know we had an issue in my district with handicap accessible sidewalks. And this was very early in my time in this position. and we called over to try to get it, and we were told that the list was about 21,000 streets deep. And when we asked, well, how long is it going to take for this elderly couple to get this sidewalk in my neighborhood, we were told, well, we get about 1,200 done a year, which would put that to about 15 years. That sidewalk would be a teenager. It was brand new. And so I guess the question is, when we come to handicap accessible walking, this is part of like public health and pedestrian safety. This is a major issue for me. I haven't had a chance to really jump right into it eventually, but this is that chance. What is that? Is that one accurate, that the list is about 21,000 deep, give or take, and that it takes about, that we get about 1,200 done a year? Is that accurate?
I can get back to you on sort of the full number of non-compliant or missing ADA sidewalks. I can get back to you on that. The 1,200 a year, this year is obviously a little bit anomalous in terms of what our construction has been. What we bid this year was with the expectation of having 1,200 pedestrian ramps be completed. In fact, in part of the budget in FY21, we actually increased the amount of money going to ADA sidewalks. And there's actually a new position within the Public Works Department that we'll be filling, which is an ADA coordinator, who's really focused essentially on how to have more, to be able to accelerate our work around accessibility and to think about the prioritization process. Because underlying your point, it is going to take us a while to be able to fix every non-compliant sidewalk in the city of Boston. And we want to make sure that we've got a strong process for how we do that and to accelerate our work, in that time.
Thank you. And so for confirming that, and obviously I'm aware COVID has made all these numbers a little different. In terms of tracking data, I know that the city, even before I was a counselor, made a very big deal about tracking how many potholes were filled, tracking how many requests are made. But I can tell you as a counselor, one of the more frustrating experiences I have is, other than COVID-19 related needs like housing needs or food needs, traffic safety and street bumps and pedestrian crosswalks and these kinds of things are like the number one thing we get called about. And generally speaking, the process looks like me advocating with the BTD to do it. I know somebody takes it down, but I have no idea what the process is in terms of how long it's going to take to get seen. I have no idea where that particular case is on that list. And so it creates a situation where when I'm speaking to constituents, there's this disconnect where they've told me about this urgent need that they've had. And as some of our public testimony has said, they've had for years, in some cases a decade plus. And then I'm saying, well, okay, I gave it to them, you're on a list. And so, that list, is there a way to make that as public as our successful potholes so that we can say, look, this is the list, this is the number of folks on it, this is just what it is, rather than just saying, I got to track down, Chief Osgood to figure out exactly where this particular job is. Is there any ability to create a dashboard for sort of that? Because I assume it exists. And so I would just like to make that public facing. Is that possible?
So it's a great question. I think we can do two things, and Commissioner and Vineet, tell me if I'm off on this. One is sort of just generally making it clear kind of the additional work that has gone in. Where are the radar speed feedback signs? Where are the raised crosswalks? All of those pieces. That is sort of one piece. Councilor, I appreciate that you're sort of the higher priority in some ways is what are the outstanding requests that need to get done. That is actually the focus of the other piece that is new in our budget, which is this sort of 311 council request set of interventions. I don't think we would right now be able to give you, I'm sure that right now we could not say, here's how long it will take us to get through that list. Over the course of the year ahead, we are going to be, as Vineet mentioned, we are actively sort of staffing up and bringing on support to be able to help us get through that list as quickly as possible. We'll know more over the course of the construction season ahead of us, how quickly we can get through that backlog. But we can, I think, and Commissioner Vineet, tell me if I'm off on this, but we can find ways to potentially make that a little bit clearer about where requests are, how those requests are being prioritized, et cetera, as we get into the work over the course of the winter. Commissioner Vineet, does that sound right to you guys?
I would echo that, and also mention to you, Councilor, that over the last several months, we've actually been able to make a lot of progress on reducing the number of 311 cases, and a lot of the cases were duplicates and things like that, or the work had been done and hadn't been closed out appropriately. So we've made a concerted effort, especially in the last several months, to really focus on getting those older cases completed, getting back to constituents, making sure that we are communicating back to the individual that has obviously waited a long time for answers or to see some results. So we'll continue to focus on that. We've made progress, but certainly there's more we can do.
Thank you. And I just want to be clear, this isn't a critique of any of you. You're my favorite department in the entire city. You do blessed work, and every time you show up in my district, I want to throw parades. But I'm just trying to make sure that in terms of the phone calls that we get, because this is the number one thing, I can't stress this enough. I have put in, you know this, Chief Osgood, I've given you lists of pedestrian crosswalks, of hot spots, what's going on with safe streets. There's always this request to have information, and it creates a little bit of a black void that I think makes it so that people impugn what's going on your end, when really what it is there's this big backlog and this big demand. And I think it would make it much clearer for everybody if they just see what that looks like, rather than, not seeing any of that except just what you've already done. And so that's just my suggestion, because I think you do great work. I'm aware that there's just not enough hands and resources and things going on. And I'd like to change that. But, I recognize that that's something you're up against, not something that's you're doing. And so the only project that I will use this time now to speak on is the Father Hart Bridge. It's been blinking lights for like a year. I know that Eversource is part of the issue here. Verizon is part of the issue here. It's third-party contractors, not the city per se. But can we just explain to me so that I can go and advocate to who I need to advocate as loudly as I need to advocate to get that done, where these holdups are, where these hangups are?
Yeah, and Commissioner Irvin, you guys might have an update on this. To connect the lights on either side of the bridge does require conduit that essentially needs coordination with Eversource. I don't know, over the last week, I don't know where that stands. So that has been a little bit of the holdup, is essentially, as I understand it, the connection between those two lights that requires the coordination you speak of. Let me just loop back to you on that, unless Commissioner Irvin, you know where the current status of that.
That's pretty much where we stand. We've had good communication, both internally with Public Works and also with Eversource and Verizon. So we are close to being able to resolve that issue, but we'll have to give you offline more specific update.
Thank you, and I'll be happy to take that update offline. And then I guess my final question is more generally related. I'm sure every counselor has the same question. When it comes to raised pedestrian crosswalks, when it comes to the speed radar guns, that, those are my number 2 requests. And I never know personally how many we actually are able to do or have available. And it makes it really difficult for me as a counselor to figure out whether or not I'm telling somebody something in terms of we'll look at this, and I should already know that there's just no way to get that done in that time frame. Yeah. Or if we're able to actually get these, how accessible these things are. So those two things, in terms of traffic, pedestrian safety, the radar comes up all the time, and crosswalks humps come up, but I like raised pedestrian crosswalks. But the question is how many of those do we have available for the city in any given year?
Great question. One of the things we actually did related to your first question of kind of the looking at the outstanding requests that we have is look at what are the interventions. What are the intervention types? Speed humps, radar speed feedback signs, rectangular rapid flash beacons, et cetera. And where do they make sense, and how long is this essentially, what does it take for us to implement them? I think that's one of the things which we can probably make that toolkit sort of more visible, to your point, to make it clear where do those things, where would we deploy them, how long does it take us to deploy them, et cetera. There is a pretty significant difference in where they would be used, how they'd be used, how quickly they are to deploy. So a radar speed feedback sign is, in general, like most signage changes, fairly quick to implement. A raised crosswalk often requires far more time and because it may impact the drainage of the street, which may require some much more significant excavation. Speed humps are somewhere, to some degree, somewhat in between, also requires engineering analysis and is used really only on streets that have low or no slope. And so there's a set of criteria that we would use for each of the interventions. I think similar to your previous point, though, there's a way in which you can make that toolkit more obvious to the public as part of the overall effort.
And I would say also just the criteria that you would look at to make that even a feasible thing, right? Whether or not it's the amount of traffic, whether or not it's the amount of pedestrian traffic, whether or not it's a specific area. I think all of those things would be really helpful for not just me, but for the public on those fronts. I'm gonna hold off until I see what everybody else wants to do for their second round here, and then we'll go to the next panel and release you all. Thank you so much for your patience. I know that Councilor Janey, I believe, wanted the second round, President Janey.
Yeah, and I would just say this, and in the interest of time, I really appreciate this panel and the interest of time of this panel, my colleagues, the public, and the second panel. I'm happy to have more conversation offline. Chief Osgood, love to engage you with some specifics for my district to continue this conversation. The one thing I'd like to just get on the public record is, and this is along the lines of Councilor Mejia's questioning around vendors and how we contract in the city. As you may be aware, I monitor construction projects in my district to make sure that we are following the BRJP goals and guidelines. And I'm very interested in the Complete Streets project in Nubian Square and adding that to the list. So just a heads up and FYI, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for your leadership here. Happy to take my district specific questions offline and have a briefing with my team and your team, Chief Osgood, if that's okay. So, Mr. Chair, I am deferring my second round of questions so that we may hear from the second panel, the public, and all of my colleagues. I'm good, Mr. Chair. If we want to, yes.
Councilor Flynn, I think you also suggested you might need a second round, but are you okay?
Hey, Councilor Arroyo. In the interest of time, I do have specific questions in my district, but I'll send them to Chief Osgood and Commissioner Rooney over email. I don't want to ask just things about my district and take everybody's time up.
I saw two cameras go on, so I'm going to go in order of the way I saw those cameras go on. Councilor Bach, do you have second round questions?
No, I think similarly, I pepper Chief Osgood with questions about my district as is. And I think that I know we've got some really great advocates who I'm excited always to be working with on the second panel. So in the interest of time, happy to hold my remaining questions, although I will just, I don't think we fully engaged with my provocative super block suggestion, Chief Osgood. So perhaps on another occasion, I just think if we're gonna, if we're really going to reimagine what life in the city looks like, frankly, more in the direction of how the city of Boston was laid out, I think thinking about whole realms of the city where pedestrians are really the dominant, the dominant entities, as it were, is an interesting, and cars are there on trespass, is kind of an interesting way of reconceiving things. But I'll hold my questions for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. I saw Councilor Campbell, who did not get a first round, is available now if you would like to ask questions.
I was intentionally sort of listening and then I had a conflict, so I hopped back on. I can send my questions. I prefer to give the time to the residents and the advocates. Frankly, it's like 5:15. But one question I will send, though, is a question I continue to get around data. And how incomplete it is, so I can send that as well. So thank you. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Mejia.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna hold anyone hostage because I know time is ticking. I don't have a district. Unlike Councilor Janey always represents in District 7, I don't have a home district, so I represent all 22 neighborhoods. But I don't have anything specific to a neighborhood. I do have a general something that I wanna offer. And so when I first moved back to Boston after living in New York, I can walk anywhere in New York, anywhere, at any time and be all good. But when I moved back to Boston, there were times when I was walking, I would try to walk from downtown to Dorchester and it wasn't walkable. It wasn't safe. And I didn't understand, this is going to be weird, but I'm going to say it anyways. But everybody was trying to offer me a ride. I'm like, why is everybody trying to offer me a ride? People don't walk in Boston. And a friend of mine said to me, it was dangerous to walk in Boston. This is a little bit TMI, but you know, I just think that we need to talk about safety. I think we need to be really mindful about the fact that we can design things as much as we want, but if we're not creating the environment where people feel safe to walk, where people aren't going to think that people are being solicited by walking down the street, down Mass Ave, right? Like all of these things, there's a lot of stigma around walking in the city that we need to talk about. And this is not going to be talked about in this hearing, but I think it's something for us to really pay attention to, because no one's going to walk in a city that doesn't feel safe.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for that. Councilor Flynn, I know you have one thing that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Arroyo. I just want to say thank you to I forgot to say thank you to the BTD team that's always working hard every day. I see my friend Vinny and so many others, they're doing excellent work. And let me just add one more point. There's a group of BTD employees that sometimes people criticize them. It's the traffic enforcement people that are out in the streets every day, the meter enforcement people every day. They work hard, they're professional, they do an outstanding job. And I know people give them a hard time almost every day. People can be verbally abusive, but they're exceptional people. They live in our neighborhoods. They're our neighbors, they're our family. They coach Little League. So I just wanted to give them a shout out because they're really unsung heroes in the city, even if people don't want to hear it. I think they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And I'm going to just ask one question that you can answer offline because I'm not sure you would have the information now. I know one of the things that keeps me up at night, amongst many other things, is that we receive a good amount of state money for the MBTA, for the bus lanes, for things like that, that we really care about. And now that COVID has decimated our economy, I'm not sure how much of that money is accessible anymore or available. And so do you know what the state is going to be able to provide moving forward? Have they given us any indication? This might be a better question for Ways and Means. If you do know, please answer. If you don't, then I'm just going to pursue that where I can. But I am concerned that the state was handling some of the things that was, you know, in a $3 billion budget doesn't seem that high, but a couple $100,000 for a bus lane is significant. And so just do you know where we are on any of that?
So, and the Commissioner and Vinny may have more information on this. I think that in general, a lot of the bus lane collaboration work we've been doing with the MBTA has not, there hasn't been an adjustment or proposed adjustment by the T based upon their budget challenges. So we expect the things which we had been talking about to still be able to move forward at the pace which we all want to be able to go forward on, obviously. And I know that I think the council sort of all in agreement with the mayor on this. There's a lot of work that we need to do together to advocate to make sure that there is not the level of service reduction that is being proposed currently by the T, which is a separate issue. I realize, I think, Councilor, what you were directly talking about, but I think one that's obviously, I think, on both of our minds as well.
Yeah, very related. Thank you so much, all of you. You're all free to go from the first panel. Thank you so much for your time and for really giving generously of it today. So thank you so much. And now equally thankful for our second panel who has waited to speak. And I'm going to now give them the floor. And I just want to make sure we're clear. Brendan Kearney, who's the Deputy Director of Walk Boston. Christine, and please correct me on these names. It's very important to me that I get names right. Christiana Lechusa?
I don't think Christiana's here.
Okay, so now she can't correct me on what I'm sure is an awful pronunciation of her name. And Becca Wolfson, the Executive Director at the Boston Cyclists Union. So the floor is yours. Whoever would like to go first.
Great. We have a shared Google Doc, so I'll go first because I'm listed first. First off, thank you to everyone, the City Council, for having this conversation and sticking around. Also, thanks for having the public comment first. This is our job, but any of those people that signed up to testify, it's super important to hear from them. So thank you for doing that first. Speeding is a huge public safety issue, as you all know. The Governor's Highway Safety Association put out a report in 2019 called Speeding Away from Zero, and 28% of fatal crashes in 2017 in Massachusetts were directly speeding related. Higher speed, regardless of limit, though, is a factor in every traffic fatality and crash. Less reaction time for a person driving to be able to brake or avoid a crash, and also fast-moving vehicles inflict higher blunt force trauma on crash victims. So even though traffic volumes have been down during the pandemic, there are still increased rates of speed on the streets. Councillor Flynn already identified here a number of the fatal crashes, as well as crashes where people drove at high rates of speed into immovable objects. Last week at MassDOT's Moving Together conference, MassDOT had a session called Speed Management to Prevent Serious Injuries and Fatalities. It's a research project they're doing. They're committing resources to study how speed limits are set for clarity to users and designers, and that MassDOT is moving towards basing it on context, meaning we could have slower speeds around places that there are many people, from main streets districts to schools, senior centers, transit stops. I would implore Boston to get to the front of the line on this. This is big. You know, the 85th percentile has been the rule of the day for a long time. So it's great that MassDOT is going in this direction. I would, implore Boston to, applaud this and, encourage it, because that has really been hamstringing a lot of the efforts that the Slow Streets is trying to do. Councillor Bach mentioned systems fixes, so I'll try to frame some of my comments that way. I agree wholeheartedly with her suggestion on improving signal policy. We need to improve the signals so they prioritize vulnerable road users, especially people walking, and give consistency from intersection to intersection for everyone. Councillor Flynn mentioned concurrent signals, which do work well when people driving are doing it at a slower speed, so they can appropriately yield to people who have the legal right of way in the crosswalk. There are obviously some exceptions. They're not appropriate at intersections with many or high volumes of turns, or at T intersections where 100% of the people driving are turning across the path of people walking the crosswalk. But no matter the setup, whether it's concurrent or exclusive for people walking, traffic signals should be on a shorter, the half cycle, like Councillor Bach mentioned, wherever possible, so there's just less delay for everyone. Here's a few more systems fixes. Boston should be leading where there are multiple jurisdictions. Many of the most dangerous roads for speeding are not even Boston owned, where they have multiple jurisdictions, whether it's Mass DCR, MassDOT. Be great for the city of Boston to take the lead to advocate for changes and lead on some of these mixed jurisdiction places, get the stakeholders to the table, make safety changes. Becca's going to share a little more on that. The next thing is we really need good data. Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor Campbell. Boston Police should be fixing their database connections so they're automatically sharing crash data reports with MassDOT. That still doesn't happen, though we've all been talking about it for years. Thank you to the City Council for funding a Band-Aid to that problem with a data analyst position, so the info is shared more readily with the Transportation Department. But the systems fix is get BPD's crash report system to connect directly to the state system. Police reports have way more info than the EMS crash data that can be shown on that Vision Zero crash map. And this can possibly qualify the city for more funding programs to fix dangerous streets. Going on data, one of the commentators, Matt Lawlor, mentioned concerns around increased officer enforcement. In June 2020, GBH reported data showing Black people in Boston accounted for 70% of police stops, despite being 25% of the population. Nationally, Black people are twice as likely as white people to be pulled over for traffic violations, and Black drivers are 4 times as likely as white drivers to be searched. This is not just a concern for people driving, though. Streets Blog reported earlier this year, 89% of people issued jaywalk citations in New York were Black or brown. We don't have the data to even know what extent racial bias is a problem in Boston, though. It's just not there. So we can't look at the data. Infrastructure, though, is not biased. It's self-enforcing, as Sarah Freeman mentioned earlier, and it has proven effectiveness. Another data systems fix. We'd love to see data from those speed feedback signs. Is there a process for it getting collected and shared? Or is that looked at when a project is going to happen nearby? Is there an escalation or a next step? Meaning, does a speed feedback sign location someday get upgraded to a speed hump if people continue to speed down a street? Like these are ways that we can kind of get a systems fix going there. Finally, it would not be I would not be doing Walk Boston justice if I didn't talk about snow clearance at a hearing with the Boston City Council. It's important to show safety for pedestrians in, that's key year round, from clearing curb cuts to prioritizing the clearing of heavily traveled sidewalks and crosswalks. If sidewalks aren't safely cleared, people are going to walk in the street, since those do get cleared. Raised crosswalks are a double win. They can slow speeding drivers and also make it so a curb cut does not flood or freeze. Last thing I'll say is, Councilor Mejia, I agree there needs to be more overlap between development and transportation. Urban Edge, Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation, and the community builders are redoing the Mildred Haley apartments. And I recently met with them through an invite from Carolyn Royce and the Eggleston Square Neighborhood Association and JP Neighborhood Council during one of their existing meetings, and offered suggestions that a new 4-leg intersection at Center and Lamartine should include a raised crossing on the Southwest Corridor and a real safe connection for people using that path. They already have great plans for better connections to the Southwest Corridor from the site and fixing access through the site. But I agree, there needs to be a lot more conversation between groups like that. So, Becca, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brendan. And thank you to all of the council for holding this hearing, for listening, for sharing your concerns, for asking such great questions of the staff. And thank you to the staff who are here listening and taking notes and taking the charge forward. I'm Becca Wolfson. I'm the executive director of the Boston Cyclists Union, and we work, with all sorts of partners to not only improve safety for people who are biking, but for people who are walking, using transit and driving as well. A safer street for one mode is a safer street for everyone. And first, I also want to acknowledge the fact that there was a fatal crash last Tuesday that took the life of Virginia, or Jenny Chalmers. I know, President Janey, you mentioned that. I know the Boston Teachers Association, Teachers Union, her school community where she was principal, so many on the council and in the city and BPS are grieving that loss. And we feel that deeply as well. And I'm sorry to everyone who misses her. The truck could be that the crash involved, or the response could be that the crash involved a truck and there's nothing that safe infrastructure could have done, and blame it on the truck and the driver. And the fact is that more than 60% of the crashes where cyclists are killed in the Boston area do involve large trucks. And while there are more steps that the council and the staff can do to pressure legislation and other measures that can make trucks safer in this region, the fact still remains that separated infrastructure, separating vulnerable road users from heavy vehicles and speeding cars, makes everyone infinitely safer. So I just want to be sure that the conversation doesn't diverge from infrastructure and go to the truck infrastructure. Last year, there was only one cyclist fatality in the city of Boston. There have already been 2 this year, while there are fewer cars on the road and injuries haven't slowed. So again, the reason why we're here is that this remains a very serious and critical issue. This year, the 2 fatalities, Tommy Anderson was killed while riding his bike at Mass Ave, and Laura Roxbury at Harrison Ave, and a man was killed on Cummins Highway in Mattapan by a speeding car. In both of these situations, and in many situations where a bicyclist is killed, the street was improved afterwards. The fact is that conversations had been going about making these changes, in some cases months, in some cases years. We always can predict where these fatal crashes will happen, and it's critically important that the city continues to look at the crash data and make much more rapid changes and decisions about where to make those changes. Also, this year, over the summer, a man named Darrell Willis was killed in Harvard Square. And one thing that's unique to all of the 3 folks who were killed this year, the 2 in Boston and the 1 in Cambridge, they were all people experiencing homelessness. So, the intersectionality that Councilor Mejia keeps bringing up is really critical. It's something that we're looking at more. It's something that the city should probably be looking at more. Where are those populations? They are more vulnerable. How are we protecting them even more with our road design and infrastructure? And before I talk a little bit more about what the city is doing well and what we want the city to be doing, I do want to talk about two things that, again, the city staff and the council can do. Just as, you know, the question has been raised, this is a resolution, what can it do? There are two things that I think there's a very good chance that resolutions or, you know, more force from the council and the staff could help at the state level. Again, one is trucks. Trucks are a huge public safety and public health risk to all people on our roads. And, you know, there's been legislation that advocates and the city have been trying to push through the State House for years. It's probably going to die before this session ends at the end of December. Whatever you can do, I urge the city council to get involved through, again, resolutions, through more pressure on the state legislature to do more. We should be proud that we were the first city in the country to have a truck side guard ordinance. And another place where we need pressure on the state, again, the fatal crash of last week that took Ginny from us was on a DCR roadway. It was Blue Hills Parkway, just south of Mattapan Square in Milton. So it's not a City of Boston road at that point. And many of the fatal crashes where pedestrians are killed, where bicyclists are killed, and where motorists are killed or severely injured happen on DCR roadways. When a crash occurs on a MassDOT or Mass DOT roadway, they typically have a much more rapid response. The City of Boston used to have a program through the Vision Zero work called Rapid Response Protocol. It doesn't exactly happen in that way. Usually a rapid response does happen. There's not always a rapid response site visit involving the whole task force anymore. DCR has no policy governing their response to fatal and serious crashes, and often it takes them much too long. We've been instrumental in trying to forge a better connection with DCR and the City of Boston, putting pressure on DCR. We know the city's interested, but there has to be more of a mandate for DCR to do more because their roadways are deadly and they go through the City of Boston. And then back to sort of what the city's doing and what the city can do. With respect to public safety and enforcement, this has been raised a few times, but I do want to reiterate that we have concerns and we know that the public has concerns with more police enforcement on our streets. You know, there's a movement right now to defund the police and to take resources away and put them into other places that uplift the community and really, you know, bolster the community. And what I would say, and there's the threat of violence and real fear in the community. And I think one opportunity that the mayor has with this budget process, and I hope the council can continue to press, is to take some of those resources and give more resources to the City of Boston, Transportation Department. I agree with Councilor Flaherty that we can't beat up the Transportation Department. None of this is about beating them up. We know they have great staff and great intentions. They just can't do everything that we need and want them to do. So, you know, we know the budgeting process starts in November. Please, please, please give the Transportation Department more staff, more money for these tactical projects, for data analysis, for community engagement, all the things that we're talking about today. We're very pleased with the amount of projects that the city's been able to do in the transportation realm with so few resources during COVID. We know that travel by bike is more essential than ever before with the fear of being in enclosed transit vehicles. And it's very exciting to see that 6.5 miles of bike lanes have gone in when only 8 had gone in the 6 previous years. We hope that you have the resources to keep that up. And I just want to say to the gentleman that requested prohibiting bikes on sidewalks, you know, people only bike on sidewalks when they don't feel safe biking on the street. So in order to make pedestrians feel safer and to provide that opportunity for safe travel by people on bike, we have to make safe separated infrastructure. We're in a bike boom. Bike shops are, being sold out everywhere. Bike share use is growing, and we're in this opportunity, and it needs to be resourced. Two more things I'll share. Is the pent-up demand is also shown in a recent study by A Better City of 4,200 employees. One of the takeaways was that people want more opportunities for biking. It showed that 10% of respondents who don't currently commute to work by bike would if there were dedicated off-street separated bike lanes. And only 4% of respondents biked before the pandemic, but 8% would like to bike after when they start getting to work. They need those safe spaces to ride. And the last thing I'll say, as far as systems change, I'd love to know what the internal processes are for deciding what type of treatment happens. I'd love to see a place where only separated bike lanes get added. And the standard is the protected bike lane wherever and always when possible. In Preble Street in South Boston, and Councillor Flynn, I hope you can get involved and advocate for this. There are buffered bike lanes that are slated to be installed this season, but there's space for a 5-foot bike lane and a 3-foot buffer in between moving cars and parked cars. That's the amount of space you need to have a parking protected bike lane. So that is the standard. You have the space. Why isn't that what's happening? And again, Councillor Flynn, we know there are many, many, many people who bike in that area in your district. They all hope this change can be made, and we hope you can be an advocate for that too. So thank you very much again, everyone, for being here, for listening, for championing all the residents who want to see safer streets in the city.
Thank you both so much for a very detailed, very precise opening. I really appreciate that myself. If I can now go to the lead sponsors first, which we can begin with Councillor Flynn, followed by President Janey, followed by Councillor Bach, and then I'll go back again in order of arrival. So Councillor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Royal. Thank you to the panelists for being here, and thank you for the BTD team for staying on and listening to the comments from the panelists as well. So Brendan, I was going to ask you, you're advocating, and I agree with you, if there is a automobile accident, if there's a vehicle involved in an accident with the bicyclist, pedestrian, you're advocating for some type of investigation, but also that there would be paperwork submitted, there would be an after action report, and that the public would be notified. That's what I wanted to work on as a city council. But is that what you were advocating for as well?
I think Becca might have mentioned like with the rapid response site visits. Is that the type of thing you're talking about, Councillor?
Yeah, right. I think if there is an accident in the city, that there should be investigation done regardless of, even if there was no injuries, but let's learn from that accident, or let's learn from that crash, and, notify the public about what happened so that we can be aware and prepare for those types of situations. I just wanted to see what your thoughts or Becca's thoughts on that were.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Flynn. I guess what I can say is, again, we serve on the City of Boston's Vision Zero Task Force, and there used to be a Vision Zero rapid response site visit after every fatal crash. Those, I think, are happening to sort of some extent now. The advocates at least don't get the invite anymore. But I also know, I think the Boston Police really have to be there to provide crash information that isn't otherwise available to the transportation team. And they stopped attending those It sort of coincided with the transition of the representative from the Boston Police Department. And so there wasn't really someone who owned that. And so without that crash information, it didn't really make sense for those to happen. Since I believe Kaylee is the name of the new Boston Police Department person who comes to the task force meetings, she's supposed to have better access to the crash information after they occur. I don't know if that's happened in practice and if those rapid response visits are happening. Again, we haven't been invited to those.
Right.
So.
I think it gets back to, like, you know, the system fix is, let's fix those police reports, because right now, like, everything lives in a narrative block, which includes like personal identifying information for the people that are involved in that crash. So the police would have to have someone redact all that information before they're able to share it with you know, Walk Boston, with even the transportation department. So the problem is that stuff shouldn't live in the narrative section. It should live in, you know, the name field. It should live in the age field. It should live in different things that you could just exclude and not pass along. This has been figured out in cities around the country. This has been figured out by cities and towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is not a problem that we should be having now. But it makes it impossible to, you know, do these rapid response visits unless you have someone from the police there who is able to, you know, verbally share that information with you. And that's kind of why those stopped, because, you know, someone from the Cyclist Union or Walk Boston would be showing up with people from the transportation department, with people from the Boston Public Health Commission, and we would then be literally looking at the Boston Globe on my phone for what was reported in the news for that crash, and asking people in or around the crash site saying, do you know what, there was a crash here the other day. Can you tell us more? Can you also tell us about how this intersection normally functions for you? And we got a lot of good information from that, but it's not the police report.
Yeah, and Councillor Flynn, the other thing that I'll just reiterate, those used to happen for the city. They've never happened for crashes on the state roads. And so again, we're looking for, you know, more pressure on DCR to hold those in conjunction with the city's Vision Zero team when crashes happen on DCR roadways in the city of Boston.
Because I believe internally, like the city of Boston, like there's still people from transportation and public works that go out after these serious crashes to look at these sites. So like that is still happening.
Thank you. I just have two quick comments before I end. Becker, I just wanted to highlight that the issue you asked me about on Preble, that's one of the questions we forwarded already to Chief Osgood. We've been in contact with him. Road died on Preble Street, safety by the Rotary. We're working with the Mass DOT. DCR actually has ownership of some of that Rotary. So we are working with them in coming up with a plan. And just wanted to follow up on my colleague, Councilor Arroyo. Pedestrian access for persons with disabilities is something that's very important to me. I work closely with Councilor Mejia as Vice Chair of Civil Rights. She's the Chair of Civil Rights, but that is also a civil rights issue. And I know Chief Osgood works frequently with Commissioner McCosh at the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities. But I think that department, Mayor's Commission with Persons with Disabilities, would play a critical role in pedestrian safety in our city. And I know BTD is working with them, but they would have a lot of good input and advice as we move forward. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. President Janey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'll try to be very brief. Many thanks to this panel. It's good to see the advocates on the call. And thank you to the earlier panel who I see is still on this call. I kind of have just 3 points. Someone mentioned in the earlier panel, snow removal. No, on this, in your opening here. So thank you for that. I think it was you, Brendan. This is a huge issue. I get calls all the time from constituents about this. I have discussions with my mom about this all the time. She is one of the pedestrians that will walk in the street because the sidewalks are not clear. And, you know, I think first and foremost, we need to make sure that all of our public sidewalks are done, because the other complaint that I get is from residents who are getting fined for not completely shoveling their snow. Meanwhile, across the street, the park that the city is supposed to take care of hasn't been done. And so I want to make sure there's consistency. And I know that's not you, Chief Osgood, but some of it may be, some of it's transportation and some of it's public work. So I want you to take that. We've got to make sure that we're doing better. My other 2 points are around distracted driving and enforcement. In distracted driving, my theory, as someone who is primarily a pedestrian, is that everyone is distracted. And when I am in a vehicle, and particularly when I'm a passenger, because I'm not a good passenger, I'm a backseat driver, I'm not a good passenger, but when I'm a passenger and when my daughter is the driver, it can be like, please slow down or don't. And, you know, she wants to give me all of her experience. She's been driving all these years. The issue isn't her. What I need her to understand and everyone to understand, it's not about you being a good driver. It's that everyone else on the road, no one is paying attention. It's the pedestrians are not paying attention. They're on their phones crossing streets, not paying attention to walk signals. Cyclists are not paying attention. I see them on their phones. And certainly the people in cars, like the people in cars, everyone, I mean, people have TVs in their cars. It's ridiculous, the things that people are doing in their cars. So I'm curious, you know, what are the biggest things that we need to be looking out for or trying to change in terms of the culture of distracted driving? And then on the enforcement side, I agree wholeheartely with the last thing we want to do is to give one more responsibility to police officers around this. Right now, it's currently their responsibility. But when we talk with residents and advocates about this, I remember holding a transportation meeting just in my district because this issue is such a big issue. If we're talking about development, if we're talking about housing, transportation, parking, how we use our roads always comes up. And the issue that comes up is enforcement. So what I don't want to see happen is that we are asking police officers to take on more enforcement and to do more enforcement, right? And I know it lives there currently. What can we be doing? How should we be reimagining traffic enforcement in our city that does not involve public safety officers? How do we keep our public safety officers and police officers focused on solving crime and keeping us safe in the city? And I know this is a safety issue when we're talking about pedestrian safety, but you know, the report that you cited, Brendan, with 70% of the stops, or not stops, just interactions with folks in our city, Black folks, even though we make up only 24% of the city. So that's a real issue. It's something that I think we are all trying to rethink as we reimagine public safety in our city. And I'd be interested in your thoughts as advocates about how we do a better job as a city of enforcing certain things without involving or asking the police to do that.
Yeah, I'll start, and Brendan, feel free to add everything that I miss and more. You know, I'd say one thing that we have been jointly working on with our colleagues at Livable Streets and Mass Bike and all sorts of community groups is automated enforcement. Mayor Walsh's bill for automated enforcement doesn't quite do what we wanted and needed to do. That one focuses more on school bus enforcement, on passing the stop signs and not blocking the box. But a piece of legislation that Senator Brownsberger worked on calls for speed enforcement and some red light enforcement. And it's really grounded in equity principles. Some of our colleagues have shopped it around with the ACLU several times, and they've said, we
'Cause
won't.
that was my next question.
Yeah,
Whether or not
yeah.
you talk with the civil liberties folks. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. They've said you have done your due diligence. You've come to us, and this was our colleagues at Livable Streets. You've come to us many times. You know, you've taken things into account. First of all, it takes the individual bias out of traffic speed enforcement. And this bill in particular caps the fine, I believe, at $25 or $50. There are diversion recommendations so that you don't have to pay a fine, and all sorts of elements that I don't remember, can recall, but it really does try to think about community safety and benefit first, as well as the benefit of trying to change behavior. You know, it's not about producing revenue. It's not about, you know, getting people's money, punishing that. It's just about behavior change. And that's what's really grounded in this legislation. Again, another opportunity for the council to put more pressure on the state to pass this legislation. You know, the legislation has been talking about, or the legislature has been talking about legislation that would allow speed enforcement for a very long time, you know, longer than I've been in this world. And I think we're this close. You know, we really need this to pass. Another thing too is that street design is self-enforcing. You know, on Cummins Highway, where the gentleman was killed while biking this summer, on American Legion, where there was drag racing is the number one concern of residents who live along the street. Livable Streets canvassed more than 450 people. I think 69% of them said that drag racing was their number one concern. Someone was killed there in a car from someone drag racing a vehicle a few months ago. And so, you know, the road diet on both of those streets, going from 4 lanes or 2 in each direction down to 1 in each direction, creates an environment that's self-reinforcing and doesn't give people that sort of freedom to drive as fast as they want. It's, you know, the environment's different, your space is more constrained, and you drive more carefully. And so the more we allow the transportation department to do these projects where they're narrowing the roadway, they're taking lanes away, people might be frustrated at first, but it actually, you know, normalizes. And one thing that I heard in a recent meeting from Jeffrey Alexis from Public Works is that from data they have, I think from American Legion, could have been Cummins, the delay for people in cars after going from 4 lanes to 2 was 29 seconds. So, you know, perception might be, there are more cars than ever before, I'm slowed down, how dare you take this lane away? Because, you know, we perceive things that we feel, but that's why data is so important to sort of counter that narrative.
Thank you so much. And
Oh, you went on mute.
One sec. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
You're
Thank
unmuted.
you so much. Thank you. I think the right balance between the enforcement piece that's automated, because I do worry about, I'm glad you're speaking with the ACLU, but I do worry about the over presence of Big Brother watching our every move. And I guess that's just the world we live in now. So I think the right balance, but I agree on the design piece. So as I mentioned, I think with the first panel, the complete streets in Nubian Square, when you're coming from around the library, as well as coming up Harrison, when those two meet at Warren Street, you're kind of forced to really slow down because the road gets a little more narrow right there at the court and the Boys and Girls Club, and then you can kind of go back up, and it works. So I appreciate your work, Chief Osgood, and I appreciate your advocacy. So let's continue to work together around, and I'm really interested in how we maybe speed up some of this because, you know, I've only been here a couple of years, but this is the same conversation that we're having. And my sense is that there's a lot of good energy and goodwill and political will to do this. So I hear from the first panel, a lot of good work happening and the desire to do this. I hear from the mayor, I hear from the advocates, I hear from constituents, and I hear from my colleagues. And I know it's not always the case where we're always on the same team. And I know residents in particular may have some questions. I know the Blue Hill, dedicated bus lane is raising some questions for folks, and protected bike lanes raises questions for folks who don't bike. But I think there is enough synergy for us to do some good work. And I'd like us just to kind of ramp that up in the coming months and years. That's it for me, Mr. Chair. I appreciate everyone on this call and everyone's attention to this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Councilor Bach, President Janey, sorry. Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I just want to thank Brendan and Becca for being here, and all your thoughtful answers and advocacy and all the detailed suggestions. And I guess, and I also think it's really important to stress that good bike infrastructure and good pedestrian infrastructure can be complementary, and in fact, usually are. And I referenced earlier the fact, again, just to Chief Osgood, I think the new bike lanes around the public garden and common, well, I know that for some folks they're hard to get used to. I think that they achieve both some bicycle and some pedestrian goals that we've had for a while in terms of slowing down those streets. I think that, but I also wanted to raise, I think one reason why it is all the more important for us to think about kind of a network of bike lanes across the city is that, I represent a lot of older, frailer pedestrians. And it's both true what Becca said earlier, that like cyclists go on sidewalks when they're afraid of being on roads, and true that we have a bunch of older pedestrians who are legitimately afraid when we've got cyclists on sidewalks, right? And so we've got to figure out systematic ways to get them off. And have everybody be safe. And I think that's even more true as sort of e-bikes rise in popularity, right? Because I think the e-bikes, have a possibility to really open up cycling to a bunch more people and be a big part of our climate solution. But for that to be the case, we've got to have like a safe infrastructure that gets them through tricky intersections and around corners and such in a way that makes them feel safe on the road and keeps them off. So I really want to stress that, to me, that's one of the reasons too, as President Janey says, sort of accelerate this work, because, I think we've had a lot of back and forth about scooters and kind of how to think about electric scooters and stuff. And then in some ways, the e-bike revolution is rushing right ahead of all of us on that. And so I just want to kind of flag that as, I think, an important part of the reason to raise this infrastructure. And I also wanted to thank Becca specifically for BCU's advocacy around the DCR area, roads. I have a bunch of them, particularly running through, the Fens area of my district. And obviously we had that tragic crash at the big intersection as you go from Fenway into Longwood. And there's now sort of a multi-year plan for making that safer, but we're not there yet. And I just would say, I think you have a partner in me and in many of the councilors who have those DCR roads, but and sometimes it's tricky for us to figure out what our levers are. But I any ideas that you have on how to shift, kind of in the same way that we want to shift systems thinking on the city side, we also want to shift systems thinking about these issues on the DCR side and the MassDOT side. So just really grateful for your continued partnership on those fronts. I guess the only question I would just have for both of you, and it's a little bit out of left field, but just whether there are any things that you've noticed in your respective constituencies that have been shifting in light of the pandemic. I know that obviously we're seeing bicyclist usage up, but just whether there are patterns of ways people are using the city that are different, anything that we should be kind of keeping in mind, things that we've learned in the past year that weren't as obvious beforehand. I don't know if there's anything in that category.
I can go first, I guess. I'm sort of thinking off the fly. One thing that I'll say is we know there's this bike boom, right? And for our organization, we mainly advocate for biking as a means of transportation. Like, yes, it's great when people use it recreationally, but we want people to have access to use it to get places. We want to get people out of cars, but also know that so many people, especially in the warmer months, who, were looking for ways to recreate, you couldn't go into gyms and use that type of facility, started biking. And my hope is that is the gateway to get them to riding as a means of transportation. And I think it has been. We had people canvassing on the ground around the downtown network since that went in first. And of the people who we talked to who were biking, I'd say almost 75%, definitely more than 50, were new to biking and said, I saw this and I had to try it out. Blue Bikes has done some great data analysis that shows year over year the number of people who are new cyclists has increased, by a large amount. So I'd say, we have real data that's showing that more people are biking. Again, recreation is sort of a gateway. So I think that means that the DCR piece is actually even more important. People want green spaces to bike in and parks and access to parks. And so if we can get them there on a bike as opposed to a car, that's great. Again, we do know that transit use is down significantly. People are afraid of being in enclosed transit vehicles. And so just allowing them to get onto bikes is a huge opportunity. On the flip side, I'll put myself in Walk Boston shoes. I'll actually say, before the pandemic, I'd say my transportation mode split is about 98% biking, 1.5% bus, and 0.5% commuter rail. Just because I don't have good access to the T and I enjoy biking and I can. But since the pandemic, I've been walking a lot. It's, allowed me just to slow down a little bit. I don't have places that are that far away to get to. So I walk to the grocery store instead of, stop on my bike on my way home from work. And so, I've been noticing when pedestrian ramps are bad and signal timing is bad for the pedestrian experience more than ever before. And I'm sure if we talk to people who walk a lot, they would tell you the same thing.
Yeah, I think, building on that, thanks, Becca, for speaking up for walking. One big thing is, people they want to be in green space. So it's great that, the city of Boston has the goal of every single resident being within a 10-minute walk of a park. That's fantastic. 15-minute neighborhoods are the thing right now, again, because, people are living within that 15-minute bubble of their home. I myself, what I have learned, my wife and I got a dog. So because we're home all the time now. So now I notice how much trash is on the street because my puppy eats all the trash. So that is my observation of the pandemic overall. But yeah, like more and more people are contacting us about signal timing because they're noticing it now and they're going through different intersections in and around their house as opposed to just walking down that one street to get to the T, or hopping in their car and going somewhere, or going on a bike and like doing the same commute all the time. They're exploring and finding streets in their neighborhood that they may not have gone on before.
Great. Oh, go ahead.
Can I actually just add one future thing that I hope doesn't become something we hear a lot. For a different job I used to take the T. I had better access from my house and my job. And a few times that I took the T, I slipped on black ice on the sidewalk. I've fallen on black ice while walking on the sidewalk like 5 times. I've fallen while biking, which I mostly do once. And so, I'd say that the snow clearance, and so people ask, like, why do you bike in the winter? It's so slippery and dangerous. And it's like, actually, it's more dangerous for me to walk. So I'd say, we really, really, really need to emphasize how important it is that the city have a robust plan for snow clearance, for ice treatment on sidewalks, and on the bike infrastructure for all the new cyclists who aren't used to handling in slippery conditions and winter conditions, but again, might not be ready to get back on transit or want to continue biking because they just started. So I think that the winter is going to be a really critical moment for us, and hope that, you know, the city and the public works and transportation have all of the resources and the time they need to prepare.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's so important, and that we have plowing, on regular plowing of pedestrian spaces. And I'll just add briefly, just in comment form, because I'm sure I should let others go, that I think automatic enforcement, narrowly tailored, could be a really important thing for us. I agree with I don't really want cameras that are just scanning the street and tracking everybody who's walking by, but I think something that's designed to trail closely on license plates and to kind of, respond to specific violations is a good idea. And I will say that in my district, I mean, the same way it's been discussed around the city, we have drag racing down Comm Ave and Back Bay. And while it makes good sense for the police to have a non-pursuit policy because of what could result if people were, if we did get into a high-speed chase, it's incredibly frustrating to residents, and it sort of like underscores a sense of kind of helplessness and kind of like, breaking the law with impunity, that people are able to do that. And of course, we saw an accident, like I mentioned, over the weekend, that I think pretty clearly came right out of that, and didn't happen to injure anyone, but could so easily have done so. So I think, thinking about ways to respond to speed with that kind of automatic enforcement, to Councillor Flynn's point, is important. And since you were mentioning them, I just wanted to flag that I have noticed the particularly bad state of the pedestrian ramp button plastic boards in the DCR, crossings lately. But I know, and this is probably a question for Chris, but he doesn't need to answer it now, but just one thing I've just wondered about is how we can move towards more durable design on that front, because those just seem to be constantly breaking. And I think it's very frustrating wherever we've tried to make, intersections more accessible for folks with disabilities. Obviously, if we had raised crossings, we would have fewer ramps to deal with, but we would still need the indication that you were entering the street, and these just, they seem to be wearing very poorly. So those are just a couple of side comments for me. And then my last one would just be, I don't think either of you addressed this sort of issue of beg buttons and whether signals are automatic or sort of by request only, but I know it's something that we, hope to see both a more generous signal policy and also that more generous signal policy be kind of automatic more around the city.
Absolutely. Like, the buttons should be there when they're upgrading intersections to make sure they're accessible and they're compliant for people who need, the sensory button and the acoustical noise. But you shouldn't require every single person to push that button. It should be automatic for pedestrians. And I just wanted to tag on to the automated enforcement thing. Becca shared so much good stuff before, but you reminded me just now that we do, there is passive collection of speed data right now with those speed feedback signs. They don't just flash the number. They also they don't track the user, but they track the time of day and they track the speed. So that information is captured in the boards. The problem is it stays in the boards for 30 days and then it just like overwrites itself. So unless there's someone going out to the site with a thumb drive and collecting that information, it just goes away. But like, that's a great, resource right now to at least know, what are people doing all hours of the day on this street. I know they had taken some speed data when they were looking at making the intersection of Mass Ave and Beacon Street in the Back Bay and fixing that. And they found that there were people going like 67 miles per hour at 6 a.m. through that stretch of Beacon Street, which is nuts. And the last thing I'll say is that an automated enforcement bill does not preclude having a robust surveillance ordinance. The city of Seattle has a surveillance ordinance, and they also have automated enforcement of traffic and red light and speed cameras. So those things can work in concert with each other. They're not against each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. And I think those are my, I'm sure I'm going to think of another in a minute, but those are my questions for now. Definitely also working on a lot of intersections in the district and just trying to think about how to make things safer. And I know been talking to Chief Osgood about how to re-envision Terrace Street, which Becca will know because it's very close to the new headquarters and a place we're seeing a lot of speeding on Mission Hill. So lots of work to do ahead. And I'm certainly among those who think we should figure out ways to accelerate it. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. So at this point, I think who we have is Councilor Braden, followed by Councilor Mejia, followed by myself.
Thank you. Good to see you, Brendan, since our little adventure out on Washington Street earlier in the year. Hi, Becky. Or Becca, sorry, beg your pardon. We heard about a data analyst that was supposed to be hired to analyze crash data. And have you heard that? I heard that they were hired, but have they been hired? Do you folks know if they've been hired, and if have you interacted with them at all? That's one question. And and again, it's another, just to raise your awareness. The Western Ave portion of Alston Brighton's been rezoned at the moment, and it's parallel to Soldiers Field Road, which is a DCR road, which trucks and buses can't go on Soldiers Field Road. So that means so much more traffic will be on Western Ave, and the ability to build protected bike lanes and make a safe bicycle infrastructure down there is probably compromised. So again, it's more of a flag to run it up the flagpole and make you aware of that, because the juxtaposition of Soldiers Field Road, which will put heavy traffic onto Western Ave, and then all the increased development over there, it's going to be tricky. So so really the data analyst was the only question I had. And again, to your point, Brendan, about eyewitness reports, I think as we found out that day when we were out on Washington Street, there was a woman who lived in one of the high rises next to the junction at Egmont, and she came down and was able to report 3 instances where she nearly saw someone nearly get killed 3 times in a row. So having a way for witnesses to report incidents without you having to actually go to the scene of the incident, if there's any way we could have people report incidents, that might give you some data as well. Might not be as reliable, but at least it would be something. Thank you. More statements than questions.
Yeah, but the Boston Police did hire that person, the data analyst, and she has been taking part in the City of Boston Vision Task Force meetings, Vision Zero Task Force meetings.
That's very good. Good to know. And has that been valuable for you folks? Like, are you getting good information from that, or you're able to share information? It's data, so
I would say to this point, meetings have been slightly less frequent, both I think because of COVID and because the city has so much work that they've been trying to do. They're just convening the task force a little bit less. So, I think since she came on, maybe in June, there have been 3 or 4 meetings. Nothing, that's been revolutionary yet, but I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So I may not know that it's useful. We may not know that it's useful, but I'm sure if you talk to the transportation department staff, hopefully it has been. So I guess more of a question that they could probably answer.
Very good. Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes, it's good to see you guys. Thank you for your presentation. I have some questions and some comments. One is around in regards to the disability situation. I've heard from a lot of folks who, even during the snow plowing, like the bus stops are not plowed correctly, so they can't get on the buses. So let's really be super mindful that not everybody can just walk. There are a lot of folks who are in wheelchairs who are having a hard time accessing our sidewalks. So I just want to like flag that and uplift that as a group of folks that often gets lost in these conversations in terms of walking. I think that when we think about livable streets and people, let's just be super mindful that there's different modes of ways of getting around, that everyone should have a seat at this table and everyone can participate in this conversation. And I think oftentimes folks in wheelchairs are not engaged. So just want to uplift them. And then in regards to people being able to, you know, this goes back to the fact of the matter is that in Boston, we don't have community schools. Our kids are being shipped when COVID, now they're not being shipped anywhere because we're remote learning, but you know, our kids are being shipped from one bad neighborhood school to another bad neighborhood school, right? So they can't skip to Malou and go to school down the street, and they can't ride their bikes to school. So let's really think about this in terms of, you know, addressing that elephant in the room, that it's an aspirational situation, but that's not the reality in the city of Boston in terms of being able to ride your bike or walk to school. That's not the case for a lot of folks. And then how do you partner up with community groups that are doing advocacy around community schools to see you all as partners in this work? The other piece that I wanted to just kind of, I am a little worried about the enforcement conversation, because oftentimes that's just a tax on poverty. A lot of people, there are some folks who I can understand the whole idea of do the crime, pay the dime, or whatever however they say it. But I do worry about those folks who are already struggling to make their ends meet, and then the speed limit was 25 and they were 36, and all of a sudden now they have a $50 ticket. And for some folks, you know, that could be a big burden, but they can also put somebody's life at risk. So let's just think about like what that looks like. And if we're going to have a conversation around the enforcement, let's do that very thoughtfully and making sure that people are understanding what the unintended consequences of something like that. And then the last thing that I just want to like uplift and just kind of put out here is that, you know, there are parents who have multiple kids who have to go to different schools. And so walking to school or getting on the bus to get to and from locations may not be the easiest thing for some folks. So whether it be carpooling or driving to, that people are doing these things because they have to. And so I'm just curious, like what and how are you all communicating and engaging folks who can't rely on the T because they have multiple stops and multiple kids to get to school and pick up. So I'm just curious, like, how do you incorporate those folks into your narrative?
Yeah, I can go first if that's okay, Brendan. Thanks, Councilor Mejia, for all of those questions. I think I noted them, so I'll do my best to, you know, provide responses where I have valuable ones. As far as, you know, folks who are differently able to, you know, have access issues, the Disability Commission does serve on the Vision Zero Task Force. So, you know, the city is working closely with them. And one benefit of separated bike lanes is that they can be used by people in wheelchairs and often are. And sometimes, you know, again, when bike lanes are cleared better than sidewalks, they're actually often used because, you know, sidewalks have the challenge with the policies as they are, that the owner, you know, behind the sidewalk has to clear it. So again, you know, when the city does a good job of clearing the bike lanes, they're often the best path. So, you know, we feel the more bike lanes, the more separated bike lanes that are easier for the city to clear. And when the city has a clear plan for that, more often, they actually do improve access. But you know, that does necessitate having a voice and a seat at the table. So, you know, we accomplished some of that through the Vision Zero Task Force meeting.
Yeah, just building on that, Becca, we 2 years ago, I We had reached out to a woman who lives in the South End that uses a wheelchair because she had shared on a neighborhood Facebook group saying, can you, please make sure to clear your curb cuts, because if you don't, for days afterwards, I become, I can't get out of my house. Like I'm just like isolated, and it's terrible. So a board member put us in touch with her because she was a neighbor, and I asked her if we could just follow her around. So I followed her around a couple days after a snowstorm and filmed what she encountered. So I just tweeted it to you, so you can see that video. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. But like it was eye-opening for me. I even thought I knew what the problem was, but it was way worse than what I had pictured. Just like if you don't fully clear it, like the slush buildup refreezes and then you can't get through at all. So it has improved the way I clear snow just from seeing what she encountered.
Wow. Thank you for sending this to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. As far as school partnerships, in most of the campaigns that we're working on now, we're actually building a lot of connections with young people and with schools. We're organizing around the Eggleston Square, JP to Roxbury connection right now, since the Columbus Ave bus lanes really, there was a missed opportunity, lots of constraints, and bike facilities weren't added there. It's an area where a lot of people ride on the sidewalk, between Jackson Square and Franklin Park. And so, we're working with the city and with organizers to provide a safe route there. And we're working closely with Bikes Not Bombs and some youth organizers there. We're working closely with folks at the Hernandez School, both the administration and parents. So we're, really trying to get as deeply embedded into the community while, we work to look at what the solutions are as best as possible.
But, like schools like the Hernandez, that's a citywide school. So most of the people, they draw from different parts of the city. I think most of our schools are like that, and the alleged neighborhood schools, well, at least the ones that I ever wanted to get into, they were citywide choices for me. So I know that they draw from different parts of the city, and that was on my egg crate, even though I don't live in that neighborhood. The Hernandez was a school that I lived in Dorchester, and that was a little bit further away from my house. But since it was a top tier school, it ended up in my egg crate. So I wouldn't have been able to walk to school. It was a 3 mile or so walk. So I'm just kind of uplift. Not all schools are like that, but I do know that some of our schools have those citywide appeal to them. And so, but no, I'm happy to see the effort that's being made to engage schools, because I really do think if we start thinking strategically about this work and start aligning people across our silos, I think that we'll be able to have the type of environment that we are all hoping for, right? Where kids can actually literally walk to school, families can be more engaged because they're in their neighborhoods and connecting with the people that their children are growing up with. And you could ride your bike. I used to ride my bike to school. I used to walk to school when I was a kid. And you're right, we don't have that anymore. And I think that, there is a desire for us to go back to the way things used to be. Well, not back to normal, the other normal, but just like some of the easy things that made a sense of community. And I think a lot of the work that you all are doing can help create that type of environment that will help address the violence that's happening in our streets, that will help, go beyond. I know you guys I know there's about livable streets, and I keep talking about other things. So I'm done with my questionings. I don't know, did you guys get through all the questions that I had? Yeah.
I have one more thought to share. And I totally recognize that not everyone will be able to bike or walk to school. That just isn't going to be everyone's reality. But I think that the goal is to make it as safe and possible for people who have that desire and where there's built up potential. But the one other thing that I'll point out that's sort of at the state level that I think there's more opportunity for the city to engage with is the Safe Routes to School program. There are really, really passionate folks who want to do things like create walking buses. So, like trains of people who walk together and who can, bike together and provide that support and try to access carpooling and things like that. So I think the more the city can be a partner to Safe Routes to School, the better. And one other thing too, our office used to be near the intersection of Dudley Street and Blue Hill Ave. And we had a group of kids from Orchard Garden who'd come to our bike shop and hang out and work with our mechanics and talk to our staff all the time. And we learned that one of them, who we actually ended up employing at one time, he would bike to school, but his bike was stolen twice. And so I think having secure bike parking at schools for young people is also really important too. It's sort of a confluence of everything.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. In the interest of time, I'm just gonna, if anybody has further questions for the second round, just mail them to me or we'll figure out a way to get it there. I'm gonna ask two questions because I think you've been asked quite a few of them and I didn't hear particularly these two. And so I think this would be helpful. And I wanna thank, by the way, Chief Osgood and Mr. Gupta from the city for being on the call this long to hear all of this and not leaving after they've spoken. And this might actually be helpful for them. Two questions, two parts. The first is, what has been done because of COVID that has led to an improved experience for pedestrians and for bikers that you would like to see us continue? Something that we've already done that you think is an example of something that could work much better and it just as well post-pandemic. And then two, not pandemic related, what is something that you believe that we can do quickly that would have a big impact on pedestrian safety, on bike safety, that you believe is something that we could actually get moving in relatively short order if the city made it a priority or made the decision to do so? Either one of you can take it in whatever order.
Yeah, those are great questions. I'll say number one, what have we done to lead to an improved experience? Fixing the signals in the downtown section, like fixing the intersection right outside Government Center. Oh my gosh, like great job, BTD. You fixed that. That is excellent. Like it's just so much simpler now. But it's not just that intersection, like all down Tremont Street, they're retiming signals, like fantastic changes, like great work with the Connect Downtown project. I think that is something COVID related that they were able to initiate.
For part two of that, what is something you think we can do in relatively short order if we made it a priority that you think would have an equally drastic impact in the positive direction?
While I think about that, I'll turn it over to Becca to give her her COVID related one.
Thank you. You're muted.
Great, sorry about that. I would say the acceleration of separated bike lanes has been really amazing. Some of these projects, last year in the budget cycle, the downtown network was promised to be installed within 3 years, and it was done in a year and a half. Everything was accelerated because of COVID. Again, we've been saying again and again and again, we need those changes in every neighborhood, not just downtown. We're pleased, with the progress on Cummins Highway, on American Legion, and what I think has been working well on those two is that the pilot has been used as a process. And that was, spoken about earlier, that when you use cones and things that are less permanent, to get feedback, to see how things work, to tweak the design, and to be out at that infrastructure and talk to people about their experience, that's really valuable. Although at the same time, COVID has meant, it's harder to talk to people. We have masks, we have, fears of interaction. So sort of a dual benefit and challenge at the same time. Another benefit has been the city, I think, partnering with the Blue Bikes funders to provide access to more subsidized passes. And again, those have really been a gateway for a lot of essential workers. I think the essential worker Blue Bikes Pass program has been really powerful, and hopefully people will continue to use those who newly had access. And another thing too that has sort of been on the back end is because of COVID, with bus lane projects being accelerated, we really pushed the city and the MBTA to work better together, and they are, which is exciting. And so projects where there's an opportunity for bus infrastructure and bike infrastructure and safer pedestrian experience is being done with a better partnership than I've ever seen before, and at greater speed. So that's all been great. And I think that's something else that could be done more quickly to have an impact, is that sort of better marriage of bus and bike projects. It allows the city to capitalize on the state's MBTA funding when, an MBTA project can incorporate both, but MBTA is paying for it. So I encourage you to do more of that as well.
Breaking protocol here for a second. I think that the COVID situation has also allowed us to work faster internally within divisions at Public Works and BTD, and between agencies as well. And so there's been a sense of efficiency that COVID has kind of inculcated in our staff.
Thank you. And actually, I'm going to break protocol at the end of this, so don't worry about it. And then on the second part of that question, Brendan, if you had a chance to get
yeah,
that.
I mean, I think it would be great if Vinny can keep that rolling, like forward, just like make that keep happening. But no, for real, like if we can get snow figured out, oh my gosh, like let's make sure that we're clearing all the parks. President Janey mentioned, I'm sure it's the parks like by Little Scobie and stuff like that. Sam Balto has shared with me a number of the access issues around the parks in your neighborhood. So, figuring out snow clearance in and around our parks, because especially this winter, there are more people that are going to want to be out and enjoying our parks because they need to get out of the house. So, making sure that there's safe access to these great resources that we already have in the city would be huge.
And can I add one more thing to Councilor Roy? Those were two really great questions. And I have one that's, I think, sort of gets to both. One thing, because of COVID is we've really given people a different way to imagine using their street space. Where before, like you would take away one space for one parked car and, it causes a catastrophe, or, people expect that. Now businesses who usually oppose parking lots are begging for the city to get rid of a parking space to allow for seating. So I hope, that we don't forget the sort of excitement to re-envision how we allocate that space and how we use that space and how we use it for community and for, businesses. And I hope that we can carry that forward too.
I think that's an excellent point on that front. This is the protocol that I said I was going to break before I go to the public comment. And just, I see people waiting for public comment who have not spoken yet. If you've already spoken, you've had your public comment. So public comment is for right now after this, for folks who have not yet spoken. If you can just raise the blue hand. I see folks who have not spoken but have signed up. So if you could raise your blue hand so I know you're there and able to speak. But this is the protocol that I was going to break. I know that Chief Osgood is here and Mr. Gupta are here because this feedback is very important to them. And they unfortunately don't get the ability to ask questions while we're asking questions. And so either one of you, is there a question that you had for this panel that you would like to ask them at all? I'm happy to give you the floor to ask your question.
Councilor, that's fantastic. I have the great pleasure of talking to Brendan and Becca fairly frequently. So one doesn't come to mind, but I obviously appreciate their testimony. Appreciate that Brendan's first point, the testimony of the members of the public and to the council and to the chair. I really appreciate the really provocative questions that I know that were valuable for Vineet, valuable for me, valuable for Mary. I think Greg Rooney is actually on as well, valuable for Greg. So, and look forward to figuring out the right way to move forward on this, and then work on the district-specific questions that I know that we will work through afterwards. I'm sorry that I didn't take advantage of your offer.
No, that's fine.
The question, and I talk with Becca and Brendan and other advocates practically every week, but this is more a plea for assistance than a question, and I think that you guys do this already. And this is not a knock on either of your organizations, but we really need to, like, just as we have good partnerships with each of your organizations, we need your help for us to create local partnerships as well. And it's one thing for a Boston Cyclists Union to show up at a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting or whatever new format we pick up in the coming year. It's another thing for somebody who lives in the area who also likes to bike to show up at a meeting and say, I live here and I want to bike here. And I think that, and what are you doing about it, city? Kind of, if local groups challenge us to do more bike lanes and more pedestrian improvements and more bus lanes, it's easier for us, because the one dimension we haven't talked about is that we get a lot of fight back, a lot of pushback on all these projects that we're doing. It's, there are a lot of people who are saying this is a bad idea. Why are you doing it? We are taxpayers. You're not listening to us. And so we need local support for these progressive, I'm calling them progressive, kind of, bike improvements, bus improvements, and the like.
Thank you. It's a point well taken. As somebody who, in my short time in community groups has seen folks see roads sort of as for cars and for cars only, and they make a exclusion for bikes, for buses, because those happen to have tires and are also run by an engine. But the bike pushback is real, and I agree that some of those voices in those rooms would be there, and shout out to the ones that I know are in those rooms, because I've been there with them, but they certainly could use the help. And so with that, I'm going to get ready to turn it over to the community. For folks who want to make a closing statement, I will give you the floor to make a closing statement after they speak. And so let me just do that for them now, because they've been waiting so patiently. And we're going to start with Andrew McKay. Can you hear us, Andrew? You have the floor.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're great. You got the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew McKay, and I live with my wife and child at the southwest corner of Comm and Berkeley, and we've been here since 1993. So first, thanks to all of you for allowing us to offer our testimonies. This has been a great education as I've listened through the entire process from the beginning. Let me officially state for the record that I live here and I want to bike. I'll put that on the list, but I'm not here to talk about that. While reducing speed limits and other calming and behavior changing measures are an important step in the right direction, and I applaud all of them, flagrant abusers clearly are not concerned with the law or the neighborhood. So beginning some months ago, a group of 2 to 4 clearly modified sports car drivers began racing what appears to be a standard circuit in the Back Bay, covering at our end Berkeley, Newbury, Comm Ave, possibly Beacon and Boylston. We're not sure where the other end of the circuit is, but they repeat it many times, always on Saturday night from 10 to 3 in the morning, and occasionally Friday and Thursday nights. On the east-west streets, they gun their engines, accelerate the speeds way beyond rational driving, and sometimes they simply run through red lights, like at Berkeley and Comm. Other times they stop at the lights but run burnouts before taking off. We're on the 5th floor, and the person on the other end of our 911 calls can hear them quite clearly. And on rare occasions, they will spin out donuts in the middle of intersections. You can check the cross-section of Berkeley and Newbury, and you'll see several circles created by one driver in one donut 2 weeks ago. And I have a photo I can send to people if they're interested. We're not going to guilt these people into doing anything in our interest. So I'm unclear how the BPD not getting more involved will solve this, but I'm certainly open to suggestions. For example, raised intersections at pedestrian crosswalks on the east-west streets or something. But this is obviously a very serious issue, and these people clearly are not going to be guilted of doing anything different. So I open that out to the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, Travis Marshall.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for hosting this this hearing, Counselor, and thank you everyone else for all the detailed and great discussion. My name is Travis Marshall. I'm a resident of Rosendale. I'm a walker. I'm a driver, a bike commuter, and most importantly, I'm a parent of 2 kids who themselves bike and walk in our streets. And in pre-COVID times, we did walk to school every morning across multiple intersections. And over 6 years, we've had more than our share of close calls, even on relatively small residential intersections. We also bike as a family to destinations around the city, and I cannot stress enough how much lower my blood pressure is when my kids are in protected bike lanes as opposed to open traffic. So thank you all for all the work on those protected lanes. With all due respect to Councillor Flaherty, I do not believe increased enforcement and policing is a sustainable or particularly effective method for curbing reckless drivers in our city and neighborhoods. Every time a tragic crash occurs, we increase enforcement for a couple weeks and then it slowly tapers off. And so in addition, creating additional contact points between law enforcement and residents is neither desirable or productive when it comes to safe communities. We need physical infrastructure that forces drivers to travel at safer speeds through our neighborhoods. So raised crosswalks, as Councillor Saibi George mentioned, more road diets that narrow streets to calm traffic, speed humps on residential streets, physical barriers that can exist 24 hours a day and are not subject to the whims of police details or budgets. And last thing I'll say is that in the last municipal election, I knocked on hundreds of doors, and speeding drivers were consistently one of the top concerns for residents. There's political will to make our city safer for all road users, and I really urge this committee to move forward boldly on this issue, and yes, interface with neighborhood groups and educate neighborhood groups as to why their concerns about the speeding drivers also mean that they will have to slow down themselves. Slow streets should be available to all of us and should not be set up as a contest between neighbors. And so I thank you so much for your time, and I'm all set.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marshall. I'm going to now open it up to the lead sponsors first, and those would be Councillor Flynn, President Janey, and Councillor Bach to give their closing statements, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the council if they have any statements, which at this point it looks like it's me and Councillor Mejia. And Councillor Wu I see is there. With that, Councillor Flynn. President Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Councillor Flynn for his leadership on this issue. He has been a champion since we both joined the council, and I've had the pleasure of working with him. And I want to thank Councillor Bach for her partnership. This is a very important issue for me. I consider it part of a racial equity agenda, certainly the Black and Brown agenda. We know that in poor communities of color, they're often more dense. Oftentimes, residents live further from public transit, the trains themselves. And so this disproportionately impacts many of the people that I represent in District 7. And when our streets are safer, and I know many other districts, certainly Councillor Flynn's district, Councillor Bach's district, very dense. And these are old neighborhoods. So that's the other issue here when we're talking about infrastructure in our street. And so we need to do all that we can to make sure that there's equity across the board in terms of the different modes of transportation. And certainly pedestrian transportation has to be at the top of the list. I'm really grateful to the administration for staying on the call the entire time and hearing from the second panel, hearing from the advocates as well as the public. I know how busy you guys are, and I know it's often difficult for people on the mayor's team to stay entire time. So thank you for making the adjustments in your schedule. Many thanks, obviously, to the advocates on the second panel. Had the pleasure of working with you guys on, and other advocates who are not on this panel. And I mentioned many of those folks like Ace and others at the beginning. Just really important work. And again, as I said, the last time I spoke, I really hope that we can ramp things up and that we take advantage of reimagining our city, post-COVID, and making sure that we're doing everything to make sure these streets are safe for all of us who use them. So really grateful to my colleagues on the council who are still with us for all of your advocacy. And again, thanks to the co-sponsors, Councilor Bach and Councilor Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam President. Councilor Flynn, I saw that you went, did he actually, so he went off mute, and then I think he's having some connection issues. Councilor Bach, if you would like to give your closing.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I want to thank Councilor Flynn and Councilor Janey as co-sponsors. And I think it's really important, as we draw to a close, to pull us back to the start and the fact that this is a hearing that's centered first and foremost on pedestrian safety. And I think it's really important to stress safety because, Vineet referenced the fact that today this has mostly been a conversation between advocates for pedestrian and bike safety and a number of counselors who similarly get around the city that way, and a transportation department that has made a lot of strides in that direction. And I think that's really cheerful. And we should also acknowledge that the places where these conversations get hard is where there are direct trade-offs, right? It's where roads only have so much width. And the question is, what lane are you going to have here? Or where a longer pedestrian cycle means that both cars and bicycles are waiting longer, right? I mean, it's these places where in time or in space, we're dealing with some zero-sumness. And I think we all try to come up with solutions that are less zero-sum and that are complementary and help all users, but we still run into those. And I think when we run into those, it's just really important to stress that our duty as public officials and the city's duty is to safety over convenience. And that's the reason why we think about the most vulnerable user first. And that's the reason why we keep the 2 tons of metal waiting a little longer so that they can get across the street. And that's not just a question of liking pedestrians better than cars. It's a question of recognizing that inside of the 2 tons of metal are just people, right? And on the bicycles are just people, and walking are just people. And it's the pedestrians who don't have a shell of any kind, right? And so I think often about how lucky we are, in my mind, to have a city that was built prior to cars, and that was built probably more than any American city at a human level for human beings. And that means that we have to put human life and safety first, and that our city, in some of its narrow streets, some of its naturally slow streets, provides us with a guidebook for how to do that, for how to kind of see our whole transportation infrastructure with kind of human first eyes. And so I think anything we can do to approach the city that way on a policy level at BTD is really important. And I think we've made some great strides lately. I think that this is an urgent matter, and there are a million things left to do. And certainly, I think the city and constituents can count on a partner in me and many of the people on this call, and as is referenced, many local advocates. The work is very much undone. I think I want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge vis-a-vis Andrew's point about the drag racing that we see on Com Ave, that I also think it's important for us not to be so much in corners about these things that we can't acknowledge the complexity of these situations. So for instance, I don't think that having lots of folks around doing tons of active ticket enforcement is going to work as a way to manage speed in our city. I think the self-enforcing stuff is important. I also think Andrew is pointing, and many residents who I represent have pointed to the fact that when you have an egregious case of a couple of people who are consistently doing a thing that is putting people in danger, that trying to address that with an enforcement mechanism is not the same as making an across-the-board judgment. And I think we all, in solving these safety issues, have to figure out how to take that kind of like human scale approach to the situations we find ourselves in. But the best way we're going to solve them across the city is with systems changes. And so looking forward to the conversations about signal policy and super blocks in the days to come. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Mejia, if you have anything, last words or anything you would like to say.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Chairman Arroyo, and to the sponsors who put this together. To be 100% honest, last year I didn't know the first thing about Vision Zero and Bikerless and Walk Boston. This is not the world that I operated in, right? So I am very grateful to the work that you all are doing and what I have been able to learn since I've been on the council this last year in terms of all the other issues that are plaguing our community. So I really do appreciate your advocacy and always your willingness to lean into the issues of equity and really always being super mindful of the voices that are not here. I always look in a Zoom or in a room and I see who's missing. And I always call it out, right? Because I think it's important for us to hold ourselves accountable to who it is that we're here to serve. And so just trust that you always have a partner in me in that. And thank you for bringing this to light. I've learned a lot and I look forward to continuing to move the work forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And I'll keep mine brief. First, I want to thank central staff for all the work they've been doing behind the scenes to make sure that this runs smoothly. And I'd also like to thank my own staff, Yasmin Radisi, who takes the notes of the questions I ask as I do it. It's almost like my own transcriber. And so when I get to look over my notes, I get to see all the times that you say, I'll get back to you with details, that I go, okay, I got to go get those. And so one of the things that I want to be clear with the rest of the councilors on the line is I know people had follow-up questions for their own districts. I had many more than what I touched on. And so I am going to put together a list of all the questions that either we were going to get responses back at a later time or that weren't necessarily asked or answered. And I'll make sure I get that over to your departments so that we can get those answers back once you're able. So if any counselor has any questions like that they would like to send to my email, I'll send them all together as one set of questions to them or anything that they ask that they'd like a follow-up on. So thank you to the advocates so much for the work that you've done to advance the city. I think Councilor Mejia is accurate. You know, I did not come from a world of pedestrian advocacy before this. And so it has been very much appreciated just how organized and how on top of it you are. And I think most of the advancements that we've seen for pedestrian safety, for bicyclist safety would not have been possible without your advocacy and without the strength of your voices to get that done. So thank you so much for that and the ways in which you've made the city a safer place for all. I want to thank the Boston Transportation Department for being here, Chief Osgood, Mr. Gupta, Commissioner Rooney. The reality is that, you know, you're one of the most worked departments that we have. You're very under-resourced, even though we work very hard to try and get you what we can. And so, you know I speak for most of our counselors when I say you're probably the one we talk to the most if we were to take any department. Maybe schools would be up there as well. But the reality is we deeply appreciate the work you do. And I deeply appreciate as a counselor to see you here listening to advocates, listening to community outreach. I've had many a hearing session where the administration does not stick around for that. And I just want to publicly commend you for doing that. I actually was very happy to see you still on. I did not expect it. And so I deeply appreciate that from on my behalf as a counselor, but also as a Boston resident. So thank you so much for taking the time today to be in your offices at 6:50 p.m. I can see it in the background to hear folks speak on these issues. And so thank you to you. And I just want to close in memory of those we've lost, 2 traffic fatalities. If we could just take a moment of silence for those that we've lost. We've lost several recently, but this is a long-term issue. And I think it's important to center just how important this work is in what we do. And so if you'll just bear with me for 30 seconds. Thank you. thank you all so much for that. I think it's important to center just how important the work is when we talk about this. It is a matter of life and death for many, or lifelong disability or traumatic injury. And so, you know, thank you to the advocates, thank you to the city, and thank you to the public commenters who also have stuck around. That attendee list has stayed pretty much exactly as it came in. So thank you everybody for your interest on this. Much appreciated. And with that, I'm going to adjourn.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yes.
here, and I'm sorry my video doesn't work, so I couldn't flag you down.
Oh,
But I just
Councilor
wanted
Wu,
to say
yes.
a quick thank you, and yes, I'm still here and very grateful to everyone as well. I didn't want to interrupt during your beautiful remarks. And I know, again, we have this team on tomorrow with us as well for the discussion on Melnia Cass Boulevard and the plans there. So we'll move from broad to specific in terms of implementation of these issues. I'm very grateful to everyone who testified and all the advocates as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. So sorry, I forgot your camera doesn't work. But thank you for interrupting there and making sure that you got heard. I appreciate it. It wasn't intentional. Thank you, everybody. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye, Kenzie Bach.